are men becoming as unrealistic as women today? And the unrealistic attitude tends to actually produce very predictable results. And then both men and women, they put up their hands in the air and say, I have no idea why this happened, or why my life turned out this way. Whether it's an old lady with cats, or a guy that's kind of really lonely when he gets older. And a lot of it has to do with the attitude that you adopt. So I just wanted to sort of start off with that, and what you guys thought about that.
Uh, Man, shoot, that's a lot to start with. I don't know if men are getting as unrealistic as women are as far as their standards for women as much as standards for themselves. It seems more like they're adopting that they need to be the 10 to 1 percenter rather than they like have more than then they think that the woman themselves has to like be better or do better or be anything other than what she is. That's what I've noticed, at least as a start.
Uh, can you repeat that kind of? I kind of got the gist of what you mean, but can you kind of
So,
repeat that in a different way?
yes, it looks like that it didn't, to me at least, and maybe you guys might have something else different, look, but it looks like to me that young men have higher expectations of what they're supposed to be, but not higher expectations of what women are supposed to be. I think
Yeah.
I would almost say by any stretch of the imagination, it doesn't even seem like they think women should have like an education. That's like not even important. If it's kind of take it or leave it. She has a job, take it or leave it. It's more like, does she cook or clean? Which is just I think is kind of more verbal muscle memory than like you really honestly consider that aspect of women. Because it's just kind of something that you would do regardless. At least I would hope you would do regardless. um, it doesn't seem like people are asking or young men are asking women to be anything grander, but it does seem like every piece of advice for young men is to shoot for the moon and go above and beyond. I was just watching. I actually just recorded a video. I was thinking about this. Where even some of the advice given to young men, if it's not incredibly rudimentary, as in like, "Hey, it's creepy if you keep trying to chase after a girl that rejected you." It's like, yeah, well, obviously. To a little outlandish, where it's like, you have to change into an abundance mindset and become more one percenter to get more women. It's like, well, again, the standards of what it is to be a man just seems to go up and up. There's just no consideration of, like, how a young lady is supposed to conduct herself, apart from, I guess, he just doesn't have a bunch of sex with people. Seems to be the
Yeah.
only thing.
Oh,
And
by the
even
way,
then
Paul,
I'm sorry,
sorry, by the way, Paul, we're doing a recorded chat, so if you're okay with that, feel free to stay.
Yeah, no
Um,
worries.
okay, continue.
but, yeah, it seems that, the only standard, I guess, for a woman is to not do something more so than it is to do something, and that is, like, to have a low body count, if not virgin, cook, clean, and hopefully you'd wanna have children. But again, to me, this kinds of becomes a bit goofy because it's a little bit of a catch-22 when you encourage young men to be promiscuous, but then tell them that the woman they have to settle down with isn't promiscuous, and it's like, "Okay, but then, like, where did all like, weren't you taking their virginities and, like, adding to their body count? Like, why all of a sudden would you turn on a dime? That was you. You was that guy."
What I
So
think is also pulling it back to what you were saying initially, how much men expect from women, and sorry, of themselves, and how little they expect from women. And women actually concur with men's point of view. They expect very little of themselves and a lot from men. So all it does is exacerbate um, how faster and harder men have to unrealistically, in quotes, I say, pedal, and how less women need to. So all through history, men pedaled harder and faster than women, but women would kind of try and meet us part way.
mhm.
I'll do 70 or 80%, but give me, I'll do my best 70 to 80%, but you give me your best 20 to 30%, say.
Mhm.
And now the whole mantra of, work harder, not smarter. Everyone's trying to sort of be smart and conniving and get the most out of someone else. And they're just becoming lazy. And I think just naturally, because men want, like, and, want to lay down in traffic for women, and women know this and feel it. It's this whole marketing word salad they use in their favor, and they exploit that very vulnerable part of what a guy's generally born with. You know, you got your outliers like your sociopaths, or your solipsistic men that think of nothing but themselves and everyone else is just a pawn in their game. But most, I'd say 99 point whatever percent of guys are born with that hard wiring. And that unrealism, I think, is a big part. So you've got guys that really go with their nature, and they just try and love women and give them everything they want and mold themselves into everything women say they want. And then they just keep getting kicked to the stomach and keep having to pull themselves up. And after a while, they just kind of realize this is the same pattern. No matter who I pick, she tells me what she wants. She says what she wants. I do it, and it never works out. And I don't think it's as much as guys become bad boys. I think there's more guys that give up than actually put on this fake. They
Yeah.
try and mimic, say, Andrew Tate, for instance, or what they think an alpha is. I think the majority of guys just give up. There are a few that give their last try because they've tried everything else and it doesn't seem to work, and they try and put on an alpha mask, and they might get some form of success. But the point is, you've manufactured a personality now that you have to keep going. And then when honest moments happen in life, like say a family member dies, or you naturally feel something, you can't actually take your mask off. And I think underneath the guy that's self-aware, very realistic, knows his relationship to the world, things like that, you can pretend for not pretend, but you can be polite enough, let's say that for the intelligent guy, you can be polite enough to nature and say, okay, I need to talk and quack like a duck to get what a duck gets between men and women, because that's just the way nature is. But if you always have to pretend to be the mask, you a thinking and self-reflective man who, by the way, would make a great husband or father or whatever, that kind of good man cannot lie so you can not lie, but put on the mask, say, in the same way that you go to the supermarket and you say, please and thank you and how was your day, and, have polite chit chat. You can extend that kind of polite chit chat with the dance you have in mating with men and women, right? But then if you have to kind of keep that going formally, and you can't informally take that mask off, I think that's where the problem lies. So guys start knowing all this information, being self-aware and intelligent, and then they're asked to pretend about the bullshit between men and women and act like an alpha. And so the unreality of it is something that always irks me.
I fully agree. Does
So,
anyone else have a thought before I go? Because I don't want to take over the whole conversation.
because sorry, I talked around the block on that topic, but I want to keep it around the spine of relationship two-way streets. I think which Boffin coined the phrase. We're discussing which topics to jump off from. How unrealistic men are being, and we already know how unrealistic most women are. Like that, that's low-hanging fruit, right? But are men in response becoming as unrealistic, and then the results of that unrealistic point of view and how they act, then they start scratching their heads, what's the word, obtusely, and they don't want to actually look at how they're acting. As I said, if you act a certain way and that action will most likely produce a certain result, why are you scratching your head with the predictable result?
Right.
To give you this simple chance to... Oh, go ahead.
I mean, Khaoru, if you want to go first, by all means. I mean, I took notes, so
please go.
I'm not gonna forget what I wrote.
No, go ahead.
Are you sure? Okay. No, I think this was a good a starting point. Ziku, one of the things that you brought up, you said something along the effect that men seem to be pretty in tune with what it is that's expected of them. And I think there's definitely a reason why that's the case. I think the reason why that's so obvious to men, like, go out, make money, be a protector, be a provider, and all that, aside from the fact that it's kind of ingrained in us. The human species would not have made it to where it is were it not for that. the world constantly reminds men what happens when they don't measure up. When
That's a
they
good point.
don't reach those benchmarks, women will brutally reject them. And to be honest, given how nature works, they're right. You know what I mean? Like, if you don't measure up, that's fine. But again, the world's a big place. Just because you don't measure up for one doesn't mean you won't measure up for the next. But I think, in my experience, I would say probably the main things men look for in women, you've pointed them out, aside from the whole beauty thing, that's obvious, right? No man worth his salts would try to hide that. But, the whole modesty thing, yes, not a crazy sexual history, or if there is a bit of a history, obviously the woman's probably a little bit older, but ideally like only serious boyfriends, at like worst case scenario. And the whole, feminine demeanor thing. Yeah, with the cooking and cleaning and all that. But I think what men make the mistake of doing is they chase women who don't have the things that they are looking for in women. And then they have this idealistic idea of what this woman should be. And they try to project that onto someone where it doesn't fit. And that leads to a lot of disappointment. Personally, I think it makes more sense just to kind of work with the women who choose you anyway. Because I kind of hold the belief that the best relationships are the ones where the woman cares more than the guy cares. Because I think men have the ability to come to appreciate that someone has a deep appreciation for them. But I think women just have so many options by comparison. It's much easier for them to just dispose of you and move on to the next option. And we've seen that a fair amount of times. So I personally think the best way to maximize your potential when talking about this two-way street, your standards versus her standards, is to just work with the women who chose you in the first place. Because obviously, they're interested at that point. And then you see who best lines up with your values. I just think that makes the most sense. And it's also a good way to avoid being one of those, guys like those bad boys and chads who just sort of take the V cards all the time. In my experience, the guys who are kind of cleaning up on Tinder, those aren't really the guys who are turning around years later and saying, okay, I'm ready for a girlfriend right now. Yeah, sure, you occasionally get a guy like Roosh V who did something like that. But most guys aren't really doing that, right? But the cycle can't be denied. If you're going out, you're destroying women psychologically by, having your fun, and then you're ghosting them and hurting them and things like this, kind of taking their emotional investment for granted. Of course, that's going to impart some sort of psychological trauma on them. And then they pay that forward to more guys, converting those guys into more of these guys. And then the cycle just perpetuates.
Well, that's one thing that's important for people to consider. They don't want to pay the piper, and so they want to say that, well, I'm free and single. I'm just effectively on holiday. I'm on vacation on Tinder until I find the right person, right, male or female. But the point is that we all need to remember, and is that you condition yourself by years and years of being on Tinder and having fun, and you condition the women that you cycle through as well with their opinion of the opposite sex. Right. So you both condition each other. You condition yourself how you relate, the distance you require and you get used to from women, which is fun, and you're not risking very much, and you're not sort of having like any kind of modicum of bravery or anything like that. That's fine. You condition yourself, but you also, and this is the person that's more realistic and philosophical about things. This world is all about relationships. So you're relating to the person, you're giving them an impression of guy after guy. Yeah, you're slightly different, you talk different, you might be more emotional, you might be more distant, but every kind of guy, she cycles through guys that kind of start, leave a buzz, and then they go away, and she's looking for that next buzz, that next dopamine hit. So she's being conditioned and she's getting an impression of guys, and you're being conditioned, and you're both having these distant relationships while lying to yourself that you can actually learn the language of intimacy from a very far safe distance.
Yeah. But I also think another part of it is that, again, just like the type of women that men are looking for long-term relationships, again, we're just in such short supply of them. Again, because, here's the thing. I think we all agree that in a man's head, there's a criteria for casual and there's a criteria for serious. And a lot of women, especially when they're younger and they're getting a lot of male attention, they conflate, or rather mistake the former for the latter. And then they realize, once the time, stops ticking and everything runs out, they can't get what they thought they could get. As I just said earlier, men should pick the women that choose them. It just makes sense. However, if the women's values don't really align with what you want, this is where you get all that where are all the good men stuff. You know, so I think men are very, very well aware of what's exactly expected from them. And whether or not they could realistically reach those expectations, that's a whole different tale. But at least they have an awareness to know, like, yes, women care about this. We should at least take it seriously if we want any semblance of a relationship with women. But I feel like on the other side of this two-way street, you start telling them what you want, you're a misogynist, you're a patriarch, you're a sexist, and you're that. And of course, you know, you can say that till you're blue in the face, but then again, you become the cat lady. And it's like, this could have been avoided. I was actually looking at a photo album. My grandfather, he served in World War II. He was stationed in North Africa. And basically, he was chronicling via photos his traveling up through Sicily, into France, and into Germany. And the whole time, my grandma waited for him like 3 years. And they were sending love letters and things like that back and forth and all that stuff. And you look at things like that, I can't even imagine something like that being like a relationship dynamic in 2023. Like, it's not even a thing. And sometimes I wish I didn't see those types of dynamics, because then maybe I'd be more accepting of how things are today. I'm not really happy about it.
But should you
Yeah.
be though? I mean, I think that we got it wrong, not right. I don't think that you should wish that you'd never seen a good example so you don't feel bad anymore. I think that we should work towards trying to make things better. That's how I feel. I think
But
that
I
it's good to
suppose,
know
yeah,
that it could be better than that than to
well,
just accept it.
perhaps this would be a good segue. Because again, judging by how I sound, I must sound very nihilistic to you. So the question becomes, do you think it can be brought back to that? Or have we hit the point of no return? Perhaps that's a good segue.
I would say no. I think one
Right.
thing that I think that the manosphere hasn't done itself a lot of favors. That would also kind of include a lot of the different content creators that have been elevated. I got a couple of different opinions on that, but no, I don't think so. I think
Right.
that considering that we've got as much technology and intelligent people as we do, and when you look at the results that these women get, I think eventually even they're gonna have to face the music one of these days. They can only be so delusional. Yeah, I feel.
Yeah, of course, of course. Yeah, so but I'm not clear on which way you're leaning when you say no. Are you saying no that like we're not past the point of no return and we can come back,
Yeah,
or
exactly. No, we're not past the point of return is how I feel.
I see. So that's why the way I'm saying things and the way you're saying things have very different tones, because me, I'm not so sure. I'll be completely honest with you. I'm not so sure. I don't know what it's going to take, but I part of me just thinks it would have to be something pretty bad for women to go, "Oh crap, maybe we should care what men want, what they think." Because again, it's
Well,
just like
so you
I
don't
think,
think that more single mothers is pretty bad? Like, you don't
oh, it
think
is bad.
them like
That is
their
bad.
misery and constantly complaining about, their close encounters with the Chad kind?
Yeah.
That's what I call it.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Of course it's bad. But again, what's equally bad, and I would argue to some degree from the male perspective, consider like, again, not the Chad, not the guy who took the V cards and did all the damage and psychological trauma and all that. That wasn't me. I wasn't in the bedroom. I wasn't there.
mhm.
I think what guys like me find offensive is when those people come around to us and ask us to clean up the mess. It's like,
Precisely.
why don't you go find the guy you were in the bedroom with? Why don't you go ask him to help you clean up the mess? Why are you sending me a "Hey stranger" text 5 years later when you friend zoned me back there? Like, why are you, that's
Yeah, no,
offensive to me.
I get you. No, I get you. And I think that, to that extent, I think that's women's falling. Like, women don't understand that a lot of the time they're creating their own worst enemies in this regard.
Mhm.
I don't know if this part of the equation is on men. I think that that part's on women. I think the part of the equation on men, I would say, is that we have to maintain virtue. We have to maintain the goodness that we have, or maintain the principles that we have.
Yeah.
I think that the other half of the equation is women have to be criticized a lot more than they are. I
Yeah,
think
for
we
sure.
spent too much time avoiding just legitimately looking women dead in the face and saying, "Look at the poop you crapped on the carpet." Like, like, look at it. Look at what you did. Your children's life is worse now because of what you decided to do. Your life is worse now. These men's life are worse now. I think trying to teach men to be what women want is it's been one of the biggest follies the manosphere has done so far.
One
Yeah.
important thing you
Go ahead.
mentioned as well, that I wanted to sort of highlight was, how men are still taught to, like the advice generally out there, the most popular advice and the most popular channels is still, the way you work out your relationship problems is to really pedal harder and dig deeper and try harder and understand what women want, as though women today were the same as your grandmothers.
Yeah.
And I think that's the big blind spot, because men will try, but I think it's at the point where it's so obvious. You try once, twice, or you give 80%, and this woman has her arms crossed and she's not giving you anything until you give her 120%.
Right.
And once you try really hard, there's no guarantees whether she's going to give you a nickel back.
Yes.
That and the like I say, the rational, self-aware guy who's based in reality, the same kind of guy who would make a great protector, provider, husband, boyfriend, everything a woman wants. He's only going to give like 30% until he actually sees, this person's just a user. This person's a car salesman. She's just like everyone else.
There's also the factor
Mhm.
of, today's favor becomes tomorrow's obligation.
Yes,
yeah.
the standard you set.
Yeah.
I did a
I
video a
think,
while back called You Act, She Promises. And I think that's just gotten elevated and exacerbated. Like, guys just have to act more and more, ask her out, make her laugh, like just give more and more and more. And she's sort of just got her arms crossed and
Yeah.
saying, well, more and more, and you'll get some. If you're lucky, you'll get laid tonight. And the guy just keeps pedaling harder and harder. And there's no
Yeah.
guarantees.
It sounds
think- I-
exhausting.
Yeah, I think one of
It
the
is.
more salty things that I think a lot of people don't contend with in the red pill space, or manosphere space might be better to say, is there is a lot of young men who didn't have to go the distance, who left these women single mothers, right? There's a lot of these different, we can cut to some drug dealers. We've got some of the different like jocks, you could say, that they're like, college jocks that were D1, didn't make it, weren't drafted. Now they're just kind of strung out. They got a communications degree. You've got all these different, guys who didn't have to go the distance, but I guess they were just handsome, they had some type of charm. Some of them aren't. Some of them are just goofy sons of guns who are able to get into relationships or are able to have children. And no one wants to contend with the fact that, like, the advice that's being given is to be so much better than her baby's father, so much better than her ex-boyfriend, so much better, when it's like, that's just not reflective of women's choices anyway. I mean, a lot of women pick crap young men that are just awful people. Like, what do we say about that?
Yeah.
Well, I think there's
I'd say sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I can wait.
I was just going to say, it comes back to, we can complain about how worse women are getting, and the media exacerbates it and keeps pushing, the fake kind of egotistical self-esteem onto women, and women can never do any wrong. There's never any reason to backhand a woman, and all of these sort of things where it kind of makes women not just. I mean, back in the day, women sort of had fairy tales, but they knew they were fairy tales, and those fairy tales told them a story. But today, they actually, from birth, tell them they are princesses. They are literally princesses. And here's the proof: all these guys salivating over you. Look online. When you get online on an app, you get the 1% of guys just itching to date you and wanting to marry you. So they're always there. You can see your inbox. So you can fool around. You can hold them at arm's distance because you've got proof, objective proof on your phone. There's 100 chads, and they're just waiting for you when you get tired to just pick the best one. When you decide, okay, I'm tired of this, I want to have kids. And judging by how many guys you have there, you can wait. But they don't know that guy's, the quarterback that wants to have you for one night in the bathroom, but he doesn't want to date you or introduce you to his friends or family or have kids with you.
Exactly.
Well, I think there's a profound level of ignorance on both sides of the street. Even looking at the type of discussion that we're having now, it mostly devolves to it's woman's fault on some level. And I rarely hear discussions when the issue of, well, what are women complaining about being addressed? What are their gripes? And I'm not talking about the the stereotypical, he's not making enough money, he's not doing XYZ. I'm talking about the more mundane women, not the women that these guys tend to look at, where most of them have the model looks and everything else. I'm interested in what women are complaining about again. More to the point, look at the type of attitude the guys have and how they capitulate to every stereotype possible out there. Each time they have an issue, the answer to it is, you know what, it was hypergamy. It was monkey branch. It was the halo effect. Like, if for every situation out there, when you have somewhat complex creatures that are human, they try to use Occam's razor, and always the answer is hypergamy instead of, well, you know what, maybe she just didn't like you. Or maybe she was sitting with you because it was comfortable, and now she found something better or somebody that's more compatible. There is never that level of self-awareness where, you know what, maybe it was my fault. I've rarely seen guys look at their past relationships and reach the conclusion that, you know what, maybe I wasn't the best guy in that situation, and maybe this is for the best.
Right. Yeah, I think I have
You know,
some.
one
No,
thing I
I
just
somewhat
thought of.
disagree, but go ahead.
Oh, sorry, just briefly, just something that made me think of something while Khaoru was talking was, you know, in the same, I think a lot of this boils down to self-awareness, not just talking rhetoric from the manosphere Bible that sort of, you know, you've got like a congregation of people that all nod and say yes and yeah, we all believe the same thing because this thing makes us feel good. But in the same way, a lot of guys will abide by the pickup methodology of ask for 100 phone numbers and you're bound to get one, and something might begin from there. No one's ever realistically correlated that to women saying, I'm going to jump on Tinder and go out with 100 men and see if one of them sticks. So those two things seem parallel to me, you know?
That's
Yeah.
You know, think
Yeah.
about it. I mean, guys say like, oh, there's nothing wrong with that. I'll just ask 100. Why aren't asking 100 women? Why aren't you asking like 5 women in the club or out at that night that you really like, have talked to, you can get along with them, they have the same values, the same hobbies, viewpoints, things like that. Ask those people for their number, not just random. Like, I think guys lean so much on data and statistics, and so little on their own subjective values. So they treat women like all women. Ask 100 random women for a phone number, and you know that's the game. That's the way to get a girlfriend. It's like, why do I fucking want to ask blindly? I might as well just kind of just hold up a card saying, "Marry me, I'll give you a house."
That's a really good point, actually, because just because you get a number doesn't really even mean that she's a nice person or a good person to really be with. I also, piggybacking off that point, I don't even think it's a good idea to tell young men that they should just be okay with being rejected 100 times for like a maybe. That's a
Yes.
little I don't know. Here's the thing. It's certainly a great story of resilience to be able to be rejected as such. I don't know how many people really can just go through that without it eventually just hurting them or breaking them. That's a tall order. There's crazy people like me who just doesn't care, right? Like, or more, it's better to say I'm a little bit more humble because I kind of understand women's position, right? Like if I ask a woman, "Hey, how you doing?" Like she does have to do a little stat check and see if I'm attractive, and I'm humble enough to say that's fair. I think that's fair because like a woman has to evaluate if she wants to have sex with me or not. That's fair. I'm humble enough to accept that. But at the same time, I think about it like, but wait a minute. 100 times over and over and over and over and over again. I just have to eat that as a man. It's
It
like,
is easier
that's
to
not
not
going
care.
to.
Sorry.
But that's what
go
I'm
on.
saying, right? Because if you get to a point where you don't care, when you finally get the yes, why do you care then? That wasn't the woman you really wanted.
Yeah.
And think
Well, it's easier not to care when you don't know them at all.
Right.
No, but think about also this, right? How it plays into your own self-esteem. If you only ask, like there's a level of courage. I realize you repeat an action until it numbs you, and you see it's kind of like a limbic system therapy, where you expose yourself to something that you're afraid of, and over time you realize there's nothing to be afraid of.
Mhm.
So exposing your actual physiology and your mind to it. But think about what it does when if the difference between approaching, like working up the courage to talk to women you actually like because you know they'd be good people. Like the cliche is when you're at school, you're just around guys and girls, and there's one girl you love the way she talks. She's into similar things to you. She's just beautiful in every way, and you just love to be with her, right? You don't want to bang her, but everything about her, just hanging around the friend group, she is your kind of girl, looks and everything, right? Why wouldn't you try your best to approach those kind of girls? And if you get rejected, it makes sense. Like you build up sort of a thicker skin. At least you're being rejected for something worthwhile. And think about the opposite of being rejected by people you don't give a shit about. Like I am so crap that even the people I find obnoxious and I just want to bang and throw away, not even they want me. Think about how that plays into your sense of who you are.
Yeah. I mean, it's very, like I said, it's very uncomfortable, and it's definitely psychologically damaging just to be rejected like over and over and over again. But again, as Zico pointed out, you just have to kind of develop that resilience. But again, I think the way to minimize, even like the whole hypergamy thing and all that, right? The way to minimize that is to just, again, when we say put yourself out there, it just means make yourself seen. And then again, if you have, good qualities, you will get noticed sooner or later. And I think it just makes more sense to choose from the pool that chooses you, because then it's not even like in doubt. Like when I think all of us are old enough to know, like if we're having a good conversation with a girl and like we're feeling something and it's there, like that like, hey, this is different from just talking to some random girl that's like neutral and platonic or something like that, which usually is some type of indicator of interest or something like this.
Yeah.
But
you trust
well,
your
go ahead.
instincts, even if you kind of can't verbalize them. You trust when you feel good that sort of there's something about this that makes me feel good, something about this that makes me
versus
feel
like
bad. And I think
versus-
most of us here would have had that feeling when we're younger and we didn't know ourselves enough. We didn't read enough. We didn't experience enough. But as you got older, I'm pretty sure, I know I did, say to the degree that I avoided the worst kind of women's and like really thought twice about going to bed with them,
Right.
using protection, all that sort of stuff. You trust that, warning sign in your head compared to women who seemed a lot nicer. It's like, I don't know why, but whether it's my upbringing and whatever, this person seems safe because I've been around them a lot. The way they react naturally in situations when we go out, how she treats me, how she thinks of me. Like you can let your guard down a bit. So, I don't know if any of you guys had that same experience. You can look back to when you were younger.
Yeah, I think that instinct that you mentioned, it becomes more refined as you age. Like you get better at it. Though sometimes I still catch myself where like I'll feel like I have some sort of feelings for a girl and I'm debating in my head, should I talk to her? Should I not? But like usually like I usually before I entertain that thought, I've gotten to know this person in question a little bit. And if I think like, well, given their personality, they actually probably would be a bad fit for me. So despite what I'm feeling, I should probably not. And then usually like it's people who expressed an interest in me that I'm like, maybe I don't feel as strongly for this person as the person that I was interested in, but you know what? I know this person would be a better fit. So despite your feelings, you kind of have that wisdom to know like, hey, move around. But I think you'll just save a lot of time if you're not just running around chasing all the time, trying to impose your ideals on someone who never had those in the first place. And instead just kind of look at what's in front of you and just work with that. It'll save you a lot of legwork.
Can I ask you, Pete, and maybe other people can chime in on this as well? Like whenever you had those instincts and you got older, do you now, or do you think the sort of mini breakthroughs came with not ignoring those feelings, like, I'll ignore that red flag and I'll just keep going out with her. And you get to the point where you start trying to verify what your feelings are. So you pick up on a red flag by something she says when you're on a date.
Right.
And then you say, like, I won't say anything. Do you learn to kind of verbalize her with a question so she can explain what she meant, just so you can get a clearer picture of her values, rather than saying, oh, well, your primitive brain's always saying, she's hot, shut up. She's hot, shut up. So you learn to interrupt and say, hang on, no. Do you think that was because I know for me, that actually started to improve my life and the way I related to women was I didn't want to have that ghost in the back of my head over time. I wanted to kind of kill that ghost. I wanted to know exactly how she stood for this thing that gave me a red flag.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of asking, what did you mean by that? Because that clears up so much. What did you mean by that? Instead of going off my instinctual interpretation of what you meant, what did you mean by that? It saves so much time. Yeah.
Because I think women fall into that trap. They don't. They're very passive and they might like the guy. And I think a lot of guys, including me when I was younger, but at some point you've got to be responsible enough to clarify that weird feeling you're getting through words, through conversation, through relating to another human being, and clarifying exactly what they mean. Ask them to be responsible for explaining your question, and that will give you a better grounding of, okay, because a lot of guys, they can just learn to hide or ignore those red flags, and over time they just never talk. And they never get a good sense of the person. And then the other person also probably feels the same. And then you start sort of separating and you don't even know it.
Maybe it's because I'm from Canberra, but my instinct is to vet. Like, get them to meet your mates, because your mates can pick up on things that you haven't because you've got like the honeymoon period rose tinted glasses on.
Yep.
So one of the first things I did.
Do you have friends that will be honest with you though? That's the other thing.
Well, okay. Well, maybe I'm just blessed with good mates.
But I also feel like at a certain point it's got to be your responsibility, right?
Oh, indeed.
I think that one thing that does catch people up is they get really caught on the representative. That's my dad calls it. And it makes sense. People put their best foot forward because they want to be liked. So that means they're probably not going to be showing all their different flaws or all the different ways that they're annoying or all the different ways or all the different bad habits they might have. So I think what a lot of people don't do is they do get caught on just the veneer of looking good. They say, "Hey, this person checks all my boxes. They look nice," but they never dig deeper. And what's interesting is I think the reason why is I think a lot of people are like scared to invest that tension up front because they don't want to scare the person off. So they're like, "Well, it's all good stuff now, so I'll just keep staying here until eventually you get in too deep." And now it's like, wow, this person actually kind of sucks sometimes.
You know what the kind of metaphor that popped into mind, like, and it happened to me countless times when I was younger, and I'm sure it happens to a lot of guys. It's almost counterintuitively fighting a natural thought. Like, for instance, if you're having a good time with people and you tell a bad fucked up joke that just silences everyone and no one wants to be around you. I think that guys feel like that when they're around girls. Keep her happy. Do not say anything that'll make her frown. So you don't want to be the guy that says something odd and you think, fuck, what'd I say that for?
Yeah, exactly. I think exactly. Yeah, and I think it can come from multiple different sources. I think one source is some men do have you say quote unquote scarcity mindset where they're like, I gotta make this work. On the other hand, it could be it's not even that it's scarcity, it's just that you just want it to work because you really like her. So now you've kind of elevated her. I think that, wherever the source comes from, people try to make things stay happy. They stay on the surface level. They just flirt and flirt and flirt. But when it's time to get serious, they're like, oh no, you might scare them off. So they never do until, they're in too deep. And now the mask, we're more or less calling it, starts to crack.
It also comes, let's be frank, with experience. There's a lot of guys who are either blessed or they've just got that personality. Some of them, become the Chads or whatever, but they're just very direct and they learn very early on that just being direct and honest works for them. But there's so many of us, like the majority, that it didn't. It was kind of listening to, the rules and how to treat women, how to conduct yourself, everything that women say they want, and then just not understanding why it doesn't work. You're following the formula to the T and she's enjoying you following the formula, and then all of a sudden it just drops off a cliff. But I agree, Khaoru and I have had countless conversations. I'm by no way saying that, I'm sort of here putting all the blame on women. It's one thing for men to learn how women, why you can't just believe what she says. You can't just believe the representative. For me, it's almost all about your choice, what you put up with, shorten the amount of time you say no to a person, trust your instincts, learn how to verbalize. This is like I keep pounding on him about this. You should be able to just be yourself. If you want to talk about, like, you can talk about things that mean something to you that might not be politically correct, even with a stranger. But if you can talk, if your vocabulary and your lexicon's kind of attuned enough that you can actually talk about these in a really mature and sophisticated way, you're not going to offend them. But if you come out there like a spurg and saying, fucking women and this and bitches and feminism, and it's like, you're going to turn anyone off. If I met a girl that was in a fair way, just venting some stuff that frustrates her, there's a very big difference between someone who vents in a sort of more level-headed way and someone who's just like a 5-year-old.
Yes, I agree, and I can speak from experience on that. Yes, the way you again with men, like, it's just give me the information, but with women, how you say it is so important. It's a joke as old as time. It's a joke as old as time. But I think definitely big time where a lot of men really screw up. Again, if we're going to start talking about like, hey, where are men making the wrong move? They just, like, when there's things out there that clearly are setting something off in their head, right? They're not saying, what do you mean by that? They're suppressing it because, again, they're so scared of losing their opportunity. They look at it like, this is the only opportunity I'm going to get in a while. I can't screw this up, so on and so forth. And then they build everything around that. And they lost their self-respect along the way. And then once that honeymoon phase wears off, the mask cracks and all that, the true colors come out. And as Ziku said, it's like, wow, this actually kind of sucks. And it's like, well, you could have avoided all of this if you just kept it 100 from day one. You would have hashed it all out. And then maybe you could have saved yourself 6 months, and you could have spent that 6 months with someone else who was more in line with kind of what you want. So I think that's kind of where men screw up. Men aren't really being fully upfront either. And yes, they have to be held accountable for that as well when they are engaging in that withholding of information, as well as withholding of what it is they actually want. How can women give you what you want if you don't tell them what you want? We joke about that with women all the time too, but like the topic of this discussion, it's a two-way street. You got to openly say what you want and leave it at that.
You've also got to value what you want, because people nod in the same way people say, oh yeah, money's not important, or you treat people this way. Everyone knows what the right thing to say is, but what do you actually believe? And there's a difference between saying, I got myself a girlfriend, between that and saying, I have someone that I actually like. Like you can go really far in like, oh yeah, you work all this game out to kind of get yourself a girlfriend. But then if you honestly never paid attention, your only goal was a cardboard cutout of a female that can cook, clean, is good in bed, or whatever your standards are. But you can't spend more than 5 minutes with her, and your hobbies and your interests are diametrically opposed. But you can say, I got a hot girlfriend who's great in bed and stuff. But the question also is, when you ask a guy, okay, you got a girlfriend, do you love her? Yep. Why? Why do you love her? Tell me. And most people can't. Women, a lot of women who blindly go into relationships in a similar way to guys, but different, because they value different things. You ask her, why does she love him? And it's not about him. It's about what he does for her. And I think guys, in similar ways, when they blindly just go for a partner or a girlfriend, without the actual person coming into the fore as well in a big way, because the actual person that can get along with you, it makes all the difference in terms of longevity, support, conversation. So you're out of your own head, which a lot of guys suffer from. Like, they're in their own head in the manosphere working out women. But what's the point? You're just kind of having a fucked up conversation in your own head.
Yeah, I could speak on that too. You know the format of my channel. There's just so many videos dissecting every little thing. And it's like, look, I've kind of run the full gamut. And now that I've done it again, you can't help but just be sitting there with this now what question. It's like when that commercial where the air conditioner falls out the window and smashes the car. And it's like, now what? Okay, yeah, I got all this information. That's great. But what am I going to do with it? And I think a lot of guys, when you ask them that question, it's like, okay, thank you for coming to the channel. But like, what are you going to do now? And a lot of them are just kind of like, So I think they need more guidance on that as well. Because I really do think some guys, they don't know what to do. Nobody ever told them, So I think that's definitely important as well.
Back to the topic of unrealistic attitudes and kind of following on where Khaoru started. don't you think that there's a lot of guys, probably the majority of guys, that really don't have an accurate picture of the modern woman? You made reference to the cardboard cutout that a lot of guys have in their mind, human, about the woman that they desire. And the men's community has actually built a pretty good generic ideal of what a woman should be. But no one is really discussing the reality or realities of modern women. I think men
I
have
think they
lacked.
are. Oh, you mean outside of the men's community?
Yeah. Well, no, in the men's community. I mean, how many guys do you talk about the realities of, for instance, women's income in today's world, women's level of education compared to a couple of generations ago?
Or
I
how?
think I don't think a
Sorry,
lot of I don't think a lot of men in the men's community have really updated their idea of what a real woman is in today's world and what her real expectations are.
I'm
In
curious,
terms,
Boffin. Well, why do you think men don't talk about a woman's income or social status and educational attainment? Why do you think men aren't talking about that when they're talking about what interests them? Just curious, what's your rationale
I
for why you think it might be?
I think, and I've talked to Khaoru a lot about this, Pete. I think a big part of the problem is men get trapped in the fantasy that they build in their head. They build a fantasy of the woman they want, their
ideal.
ideal woman. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. It's almost like they don't want to deal with the realities of the modern world and the modern woman. And
Yeah.
as long as we keep trying to regress to the example that you gave earlier in the discussion about how your grandfather and your grandmother courted one another,
Yeah.
then that's kind of a part of the male fantasy, I think.
Yeah,
But
and it's gone.
it's gone. Yeah, that's the simple truth. It's gone. So as long as the men's community keeps regressing to that type of fantasy thinking about relationships and what women should be, but in reality they're not that anymore, then there's just this churning of frustration and there's no forward movement made.
Okay. And a follow-up question. Do you think on this two-way street, women can also take the advice that you just gave and also kind of dial it back a little bit as well with their expectations? Given the fact that obviously, right, women make their own money now, they have their own status now. Yes, I understand nature. It's kind of hard to push past like the inherent thing to seek a protector and provider. But look, this is the world we live in. Do you think it's unreasonable to tell them as well, like, hey, you got to be a little more realistic with the income and status requirements? Most dudes aren't making, high 6, low 7 figures. And most guys aren't, ridiculously high status. Most people are just average. And there's nothing wrong with average. Average is totally okay. So I think, yeah, my question is, do you think it's reasonable to also kind of pose that in the opposite direction as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of plays into the theme of the talk, Pete. The whole issue of unrealistic attitudes. It's easy for men to see how unrealistic attitudes have become with a lot of women, but I think it's also as important, as Khaoru said, for a lot of men to take a hard look in the mirror and kind of update their ideas and their perspectives as well.
Yeah.
I disagree slightly, only because, again, I'm not blaming women, but I'm just citing the difference between men collectively and women collectively, is that if we take a good, long, hard look in the mirror, and if we're honest with ourselves, we care less about what other men think. So you could have guys in the manosphere, which there have been guys that were like, oh yeah, women, marriage, fuck that. And then all of a sudden they come to a point where, like, I don't like where I've been for the last couple of years. I want my life to be better. He might want kids, and he just sort of does that. But with women, the hive mind, I think they find it harder because of, if they take the action in life to sort of do what's right by them, other women tear them apart out there. Like, so women are their own worst enemies, and even sort of the hive is very, very sort of condemning of an individual woman.
Yeah, and I'd like to touch on that. On my channel, the way I kind of refer to it is that women kind of have this proclivity to really avoid social disapproval at all costs. They hate social disapproval probably more than anything. Probably the only thing they hate more than that is direct threats to their survival. Of course, that's everybody. But I think the reason for that is because, again, back in cave people days, you got exiled from the tribe. You were on your own, and the odds of getting eaten by a bear not long after was pretty high. And what I like to talk about, our cave people brains, that we evolved to thrive in an environment 10,000 years long gone. Those times are gone. I like to call that the MS-DOS brain, right? Microsoft DOS. And the problem is we live in a Windows 11 world. And there's a lot of things and nuances that our MS-DOS brains can't understand. It's like the same thing, like when you watch adult films, right? You get aroused. We know consciously, like, we're not going to be reproductively successful. We're not going to have children as a result of this, but our MS-DOS brains can't tell the difference, which is why you still get aroused. These kind of things. So yeah, it's kind of really hard to like tell someone who has that response to avoid disapproval at all costs, like, oh hey, just don't worry about it. So I can empathize with that. It's a different dynamic
Well,
because men are just kind of like, well, I'm going to do my own thing. I don't really care. This is meritocracy. I need to make it to the top.
Well, I think that's where I would kind of have to push back a little bit because I think that assumes that women are slaves to their passions and instincts when I don't
We
really
all
think
are,
that they
in my
are. I don't think that's the case. I mean, look at us as we sit here having a conversation with all our modern technology. As we go to the supermarket to pick up meat, we don't go out and hunt. We don't use those. A lot of people don't even have the skills to go out and hunt and do all that type of stuff. It's something you have to be taught. Social skills are also something that you have to be like taught, that you have to understand. Like, you have to understand social hierarchies relative to yourself because you engage in them. Like, autistic people don't get that. Like, autistic people have to literally study how people operate and be taught more directly than you and I would be taught as we just exist in like just
Right.
a friend group or something like that.
And what gave them
So
that handicap?
all of these different things. I think there's a genetic component to autism. I don't know exactly what causes autism,
That's
but I know
exactly
how
what
it works.
That's exactly
But
what I'm driving at. Yeah.
but either well, the point is, even though we might have the same hardware we had 10,000 years ago, our environment is different, and we have to
Yep.
adapt to that environment.
Yep.
So
Right. And how
even
long do you think that
though
takes?
it takes like 20 years, because we are already adapted to our environment as it is. In fact,
So,
even the
so let me
manosphere in and of itself is that adaptation to our environment. I
so
think
let
it's
me
a
ask you a
bad
question.
one, but
Let me ask you
it
a
is an
question.
adaptation. Go ahead.
A baby pops out of the oven. Does it have the genetic proclivities to know how to use an iPad? Does it have the
No.
proclivities to
Well,
exactly?
I would say no, but it
That's
would
what I'm
have
trying
to
to explain.
because but hold on. But this is the thing that's interesting because my niece, she's like what, 5? She can use an iPad. But I
Right.
probably wouldn't. I couldn't use an iPad until I was like what, 14, because that's when they were a thing. So it's
Right.
like when you're
Yeah.
introduced to this stuff at a young age, you're able to adapt to it really quickly. In fact, kids can adapt to things incredibly quickly.
Right.
Like language, again,
Right.
social skills and stuff, things are being taught. Like this, I think so the programming to learn, I think, is the same, but the environment's different. So what
Right.
I'm trying to say is that, like, due to the fact that we're in a different environment, why would we rely on these old rules? Like, it's ridiculous to tell
Well,
like you
the
need
rule,
this
the rules.
strong, big, gruff protect. Hold on, you need a big, strong protector that's tall. But wait a minute, I have a firearm. I just shoot him. So what you really
Right.
need is another person with a firearm. You don't need big, strong, tall. You need a firearm. That's or like you would need a
But how is
knife
the
or
firearm?
something.
Of course.
So
But the question is, again, your conscious frontal cortex can understand that, but your subconscious hindbrain that tells you to run, that tells you to avoid social disapproval, things like this, and that part of your brain understands it. Or is there something else that's from a relic from our caveman days that's still with us to this day? And that's why these obstacles that seem to have been around for quite a long time, we just can't get past them. Like, you start talking to women about things like, being held accountable and things like this, a lot of them get very hostile. Sure, you might make some ground if you word it tactfully. You might get some ground, but most of them are very hostile. And the reason why is, in my opinion, I believe, it leads to social disapproval, which in their hindbrain means exile, and they become bear lunch. Even though in Windows 11, we know fully well she's not going to become bear lunch. We know that. But her MS-DOS does not, which is why she gives you the hostile response. That's
think
kind
that's
of what I
why.
was saying with that.
Yeah, but I think that's kind of part of why I disagree. I actually don't think that it's women's like hindbrain that makes them afraid of accepting responsibility and whatnot. I think it's their forebrain. I think it's the fact that they were never taught to. Like when you look at how a lot of young ladies operate, a lot of the times, like there's scapegoats. People are more comfortable with them. People allow women to be more expressive. There are no social guidelines for how women are to operate with young men. No specific ones apart from like at the most don't have sex with them, which even then is an interesting catch-22. You probably talk about, in a minute if you want to, but like for the most part, there's not like a set rule of guidelines of how women are to interact with men. On the other hand, men do have a set guideline. You don't hit women, you are a gentleman, you take care of them, you protect, you provide for them. These are all things that you're taught from a young age. That's what you're supposed to do and be for women. So when women are then as like teenagers to adults now being told, wait a minute, you need to be responsible. It's like, what are you talking about? You never taught me that. I was never told to be responsible. In fact, we could even go one step further, especially if you look at the way feminism has ingrained itself in our upbringing. And that is men are also told that, or I'm sorry, women are told that men are their greatest adversaries, more or less. Men are the most danger to you. White men have a lot of power over you. They have a lot of privilege. There's a lot of different social structures that are against you. So there's an antagonistic relationship between men and women. So you
Right.
have an upbringing of men are your enemies and greatest threat. And then you're telling them you need to be responsible to those guys. You need to help those guys. And it's like, and as a woman, it's like, what are you talking about? They're my enemies. And
Right.
I don't think it's a forebrain. I think it's I don't think it's like millions of years of evolution in the past or caveman. I think it's currently how you condition women is to not even look at men today as human beings, as people. We're
Yeah,
their
but I
adversaries.
think you're just proving what I hear is you're proving what Pete said, because women's DOS is still the same, but they've been given a shitty Windows, and that's
Yes.
what they're struggling against, and men today as well. So I see you guys agreeing more than disagreeing.
Right? But then I would also ask one more follow-up question, right? If the Windows 11 supersedes the MS-DOS, how do we explain situations like how the sexuality walks stop when Venezuela crashes? How We Don't Need No Men stops when Russia invades Ukraine? Again, there's just certain default things kind of in our hindbrain that we don't really think about in our day-to-day. But when things go down, it's time. And I feel like if it really truly was overridden and removed within 20 years, it just wouldn't go down like that. It takes a lot longer than 20 years. That's all I'm really getting at. But of course, both environment and our natural proclivities, they both play a role in the equation. I never denied that. I just think a lot of people sleep on the natural proclivities part. They act like, oh no, that's nothing. It's all, socially constructed. It's
I don't
all
think I
behavior
disagree
and that.
with the
You know.
instincts existing. I don't think that that's the explanation. I think that every human has different baseline instincts. Like for example, whenever you get scared, you lift your hands up to protect your face, right? Everyone does that. And
Yes.
then what's an interesting thing about that is you can train that instinct, like in martial arts, to get into an
Yes.
on guard position or like to fight. So there are certain
Right.
instincts that we have, but I don't
But you
know
can
if
hone.
the reason why women don't treat men as people is because like it's some instinct
Oh no, that's a whole
buried into
separate
their
thing.
brain. I think that's conditioning. I think that if you're saying that like the risk aversion is the instinct, and I guess I would say that the application to that instinct is men are their enemy, that would be the connection there. But that would mean that you need to change the conditioning and that it's not men as a class, it's evil men, or like it's men that have XYZ different characteristics. That would be the problem, I think, not women being afraid of something. I think that probably would make sense for them to be risk adverse.
Well,
Yes.
you build like the MS-DOS, I think, is the default, and people don't need to be trained into that. That's
Correct.
what your software is built around or upon. So your MS-DOS is the foundation, right? So that is what it is, and you won't change it. And I think the natural MS-DOS of women is that I feel fear naturally because of a situation, right? The faulty windows is you're afraid because of men. It's rather than in previous times, it was like, if you do feel afraid, there are realistic things, but don't worry, you've got community, you've got a man, you've got brothers, you've got fathers, you've got things like that. But now like the faulty software of the modern world is like, you don't need them. You will never feel afraid if you grab onto this. We'll give you new software to feel empowered. So I think the faulty software, but I think the underlying where fear comes from will naturally be provoked. It's how the better or shitty software you have tries to deal with it. And
Yeah.
I think the way people's faulty Windows today tries to deal with it, both guys and girls, is through these narratives, these churches of the manosphere or feminism that sort of cleverly give you these really eloquent and intelligent answers. But one, if no one tries to apply them and still believes they're true, that's shitty, because most of these guys and girls, once they get out of university, they're fucked. Or most of these guys that trying to like talk about how logically tight their arguments are online. It's like, how often do you guys try and implement that in your life? How often do you talk better and directly at women, whether it's on a date or platonic? How often do you are you realistic about these things that you want to reprogram your Windows 11? How do you actually try to do that? Well, I can't. And so you're trying to like make your DOS be equivalent in an equivalent, unmovable way to your Windows, which is really stupid, because the Windows you're largely conditioned by through life is really faulty between both men and women.
Yeah. Exactly. And I'm not saying that environmental factors can't suppress what we are. For example, men have a much higher proclivity for violence. I think we agree on that. But the law as a system suppresses that for many men, right? So that's a perfect example right there. But I wanted to also pinpoint why women don't see men as human, right? That idea where like they kind of see them as utility. Why is that a thing? Because again, it makes sense that since men are bigger and stronger, they have a protector instinct to protect women and children. Also because eggs are more valuable than their seed because it's more abundant. But aside from that, again, the whole thing is like, it doesn't make sense for a woman to have that towards men. This is why men go to war and most soldiers are men and not women. This is why the women get to go on the train and leave Ukraine, like that kind of stuff. So all we're trying to say is that, like, yes, there's a lot of this socially engineered feminism. There's socially engineered educational systems in college campuses. And it's really messing things up and making people think the world works a certain way when it really doesn't. And it doesn't really reconcile with what their natural impulses are telling them. And it's just creating a huge disconnect all around. And the reality is, though, if you shut out the lights on this socially engineered world, what do you have left to rely on? It's the MS-DOS. It's always going to go back to that. But that isn't to say that the environment, if it persists long enough, can change the MS-DOS. The MS-DOS can be changed. It's just that it takes a really long time to change it. Humans are very complicated. So yeah.
Yeah, I think the thing that I would more hesitate on is diminishing power when we probably shouldn't. I think that the reason why I would want to push back on these ideas of just relying on just our subconscious mind or baser instincts is because it kind of removes, again, just how important social conditioning is, raising people is, environment is. And I don't think that it's a good idea to just kind of like just accept women for being kind of crappy people. Yeah,
You
I
don't
think we
have
do need to hold their feet to the fire and demand that they need to be better humans. I don't
Yeah.
think we
I-
should
I could-
accept that women are just like I'm afraid of like being socially ostracized, so I'm just gonna go with the flow. I say no, fuck that shit. You are acting like a bad person. The flow is bad. You don't need to act like that.
I agree with
Yeah.
you, but what I'm telling you is that more often than not, they don't care. Because again, how are you going to take the opinion of a utility seriously? It's like, don't you have to go to work and make more money for me? Like that's kind of how they look at it. And I'm not saying it's universal. And in fact, based on like what I talked about, my grandparents' relationship, through proper social norms and conditioning, you can suppress these things. We've shown that we can do it. Was it not for enforced monogamy, the economic boom and industrialization we saw would have never happened. So of course, I am not discounting environment. Of course it matters. Yes, these things can be taught, and in turn, it has an effect on our expression in the world. Absolutely. But you even said it yourself. What happens when there are no social norms? What happens when there are no rules anymore? You just kind of, unleashed all the chains. Well, you got what we got right now. And I'm with you. But again, are we at the point of no return? I tend to think we might be. You still have a feeling that, hey, we're not. I think we could still reinstate some of these norms and kind of get us back on the right track. Maybe, but I'm thinking it takes something catastrophic like Ukraine for them to be like, oh, shit just got real. And it's been shown time and time again.
Even then, I still don't. I don't even think that would socially recalibrate them.
It has.
I think it has to be a conscious effort, because I think that, like, you threw out a whole bunch of young men to go fight and get killed over a conflict that honestly probably
Yes.
didn't even need to happen. I don't think
Yes.
women are then going to be like, oh wait, hold on, I should have loved and respected them this whole time. If it is just their proclivity to just not care about us as people, that's not going to be the thing that finally gets them to change their mind.
Yeah, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that, again, all of a sudden, the things that make men important, they're like, please save us. It takes, like, just to get to that, before we even get to the negotiating table, it takes something like a Ukraine or Venezuela to happen. But to get them to come to the table, I think, honestly, I think millennials, my generation, we're finished. I think Gen Z, well on its way out. So we'll see what the next generations bring. But I'm looking at the education system. I'm looking at how everything is going. It's not getting better, man. I want it to get better, but it's like, how do you make it better? I see videos on the parents complaining and like telling the teachers, like, yo, this is unacceptable. Don't do this. And they're just kind of, waving their hand like, listen, you're not the teacher. And it's like, well, how are we going to make a difference? That's what I'm trying to figure out.
Look, a lot of these discussions on sort of world building, I understand them, they're correct, but at the same time, I don't think they're implementable in our lifetimes to make our individual lives happier.
Yes.
They're kind of, so for me, it's always, what can the individual man do to make his relationship with the world, but just specifically here, dating and women, how he wants to live, the kind of girl he wants, the relationship he wants to have, what can they do to make it more realistic so he gets more positive, predictable outcomes? Because sort of the media, all that sort of shit, we can talk and we would all nod our heads, right? But like, I'm always trying to pair it back to, there's not enough time in my lifetime to wait until the past comes back and, women calm down and, how many wars do we need in how many countries and how many sort of lockdowns for how many years do we need to sort of really poke and prod people's, MS-DOS to sort of, for me, it's like, where can guys become more realistic in their attitude? I mean, we know how unrealistic most women are. And there's the few that, have the wherewithal, or sort of maybe how they were raised, or they have a lucky moment that splashes cold water on their face. And they really do have a long, hard look in the mirror and say, it's not all him. I was a bit of a bitch and I did this, this, and this. So they start taking some accountability. So how can men, while knowing what women are like, and we can all nod, how can we say, given that in my lifetime, this is the standards by which I'm going to sort of, and one thing I've often pondered and chatted with these guys who are your basic kind of lemmings, and I say that not in a derogatory way, because I was like that a long time, like just looking at the unfairness, and no matter what I did, I got kicked in the teeth as though I was the villain, but I was playing the opposite role. Objectively, I was, but I was treated like the villain. And a lot of these guys, if you actually say, okay, in the manosphere, we can all agree, hypergamy we don't like. Okay, bullet point that. Hypergamy. What else? Anger issues. What else? An easy one is if she's a feminist, a self-proclaimed feminist. Another one, what's one? Like, she goes out with bad boys. Her last ex was in prison. She's got 3 kids. Like, we can bullet point all of those very obvious red flags that we could see from orbit, right?
Yes.
And then you say, okay, here are these obvious points. How many of you guys excuse, like, all of those are deal breakers? You don't have to have 3 of them. One of them dominoes into the whole effect of your relationship with her. If she's got kids, anger issues, hypergamous, materialistic, blah, 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 right? Just one of those obvious red flags, your relationship is fucked. How many of the guys say, oh, well, there's one of them, but I haven't seen the others yet, and she's hot. And so many guys don't abide by any standards. They only have standards when they don't practice them.
Yep. And this ties back to the whole fear of losing a perceived good thing when it really wasn't that good. You find it out after the honeymoon phase. But yeah, to answer the question on an individual level, I think, again, just from my own personal experience, I think you're right. You can't really do much at the macro, but on the micro level, self-awareness is the foundation. I have to say that. You have to have an awareness of what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, what your limitations are, and all that stuff. And then in particular with the opposite sex, I think it just, in this day and age, like doing all the legwork and all that stuff, just like chasing, it just doesn't make sense. But if a girl expresses an interest in you, like, I think that, why wouldn't you talk to her? Even like if like your feelings for her aren't like strong, it's like, hey, this girl's expressing an interest with you. At least like check it out. What's it about?
Well,
You know?
well, yeah, I think the thing, one of the things that young men struggle with, and I think this is kind of evident in the way a lot of advice is given, is that first mover of attraction from start to finish. I think that if a lot of young men were just getting a bunch of women, even if it's not a bunch, just a few women to give them that first little attention, they probably would fold very often. And I don't know if that'd
Sadly.
be a good thing, but I think that they would fold more often than not. I think the issue is that they can't get to the first step. And I'll tell you why I really believe this, because again, I was making a video today. Most of the advice that I see is just surface level. Here's how to get the woman to be attracted to you. I can't remember the last time I watched any manosphere video on how to maintain a good relationship with a woman, if I've ever seen it. I mean, I can tell you all the different times I've seen not to get married to a woman, and I've seen all the times to build a rotation. I've seen all the dark triad stuff. I've seen all the fluff, but I haven't seen, all right, here's how you maintain a long-term relationship with a woman. Here's how you get
That
married
wouldn't
to
be
that woman.
considered.
And
That wouldn't be
work with her.
considered a manosphere channel.
Right.
Well, I'm pretty sure that's the
Well,
thing.
here's the thing.
So
Human, just to step in there, PUA, I would consider that part of the manosphere. But the thing is, other parts of the manosphere don't particularly like them. But that being said, again, the people watching that type of content, those guys, on paper, they say they want a serious relationship. But if they're watching that kind of content, that it's obviously not what they want. They want to be on a fast life strategy, casual only. That's what they're looking for, but they're not being honest with themselves about what they actually want. But yeah, I think it's very important to understand how to have solid relationship building skills, how to manage it, how to do maintenance and all that. It's all great stuff. But if you genuinely are looking for an LTR, yeah, PUA channels are probably not the best place to get that information, in my opinion. Yeah.
yeah,
One thing
I don't think
I
there are very
wanted
many.
to
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
sorry. One thing I wanted to add as well, while you were talking about that a moment ago, Pete, is that it doesn't help in today's day and age, and I know Boffin will sort of agree with this. We've talked about this, is that social media isn't to blame, but it's really been kerosene on the difficulties and
Yes.
the sort of boundaries to enter. Whereas, say before, say now, right? Almost all people meet online. If you heard of a story of like a young person from like teens to their mid-30s that just met by approaching someone, you'd say it was a very, very rare case. Most people meet online. So what happens is you fictionalize a story, or you build up an image of this story, right? So essentially you're going on a date with a screensaver built up in your mind. And I think everyone does today. And so nothing, if it's not exactly your screensaver, when the screensaver pops off on the date, people do everything they can to keep the screensaver alive, and it's not there anymore. So whereas in the days before online dating, I had no screensaver. It was just I'm being set up, or I see the actual girl in front of me and I start talking to her. So we are really hamstrung with the screensaver because so many people are alone. They'll fight to death to keep the screensaver going, and guys do that by excusing all the boundaries they got on the hilltop and screamed in the manosphere by. But as soon as they go on the date, they don't want to let the screensaver disappear.
I agree 100%. And again, this is where that question of, okay, great, you listened to all this information, the whole thing, you went to the depths of the manosphere. Now what? Are you going to keep being the same guy that just folds? Or are you actually going to be like, you know what? I really don't like it when people do that to me. That's very disrespectful. So you know what? If I see that, maybe I'll take a moment to say, hey, what did you mean by that? But like, again, if I'm hearing the same things I don't like, it's like, hey, I have to have enough self-respect. I mean, hey, if I cut this girl off, it might be another 6 months before I run into another one. And you know what? That's okay. And I think a lot of guys, again, they have, again, for lack of better terminology, they do have that scarcity mindset. But the way I look at it, I've been on my own for a very long time, and I just look at it like, well, what's so wrong about that? If it means that your integrity, your self-respect, and all that is intact, what's so wrong about that? I'm not saying pass up good opportunities when they come up. Of course, that would be ridiculous. But again, what's wrong with having boundaries? And I think a lot of these guys, they're just frustrated that the very boundaries that they refuse to uphold are getting violated. They're complaining about them being violated, but then it's like when it's time to uphold those boundaries and defend them, it's like crickets. And sometimes you do run into that as well. And this is the kind of thing that leads into kind of an infinite rage loop or an infinite depression loop where these guys are doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Yeah.
But yeah, there's also, I understand that, when you were with the wrong person for years or you weren't treated right by your parents and you never felt understood, heard, and you felt alone. All of a sudden, it's like finding religion or a church or some group, right? And they hear you. You like the message, like it emboldens you, you feel alive. And but also, like say, in the Church of the Manosphere, even similarly in the Church of Feminism, they've got these tenets, what you can and can't do. So even if, like say, you're a dyed-in-the-wool manosphere guy in whatever pocket of the manosphere, and there's these certain rules that your group, like your brothers, that you respect, and you've got this honorable agreement with, we don't talk to women, we don't get married, we don't get this or that, or blah, blah, blah. So it's almost like, going back 120 years, you don't talk to someone of a different color or something. So you can't actually relate to a human being. And sometimes I wonder, a lot of these guys that found themselves in these sort of little churches and groups where they might know everything, they know their boundaries, so to speak, but again, they don't practice them. And then they could have the best woman come in front of them with no red flags, but they just won't talk to her because she could produce red flags, just simply because, and really to me, it's like your ethics mean nothing. Your values mean nothing. Everything you believe in means jack shit, because at the end of the day, you don't trust yourself. You think you're Yoda with this stuff, but then you're Yoda who's curled up in the corner and doesn't want to fight.
Exactly. And this again ties back to the whole unrealistic attitudes as well as the unrealistic approaches to things. It leads to predictable results, which is the topic, right? You keep ending up in the same exact place because again, you're not willing to look inward, have the self-awareness and change. But again, I'm not someone without empathy. I understand that every man getting to that point takes time. But if you stay stuck in rage and depression, you never just accept what's in front of you for what it is and then just move forward. You're just going to keep getting the same predictable results. And it feels great to go to a place and hear other guys say, I hear you, brother. Yeah, it feels great, but eventually you're going to have to get up and dust yourself off. Easier said than done, I know, but it's like, what other option do you have?
Yeah, I know, like you get into a comfortable space, and as human beings, we love comfort. Our survival mode likes comfort. Human, you didn't die yesterday, so do the same thing today. Believe the same thing today. Talk the same way today. But after time, that kind of mode, it's like concrete that hardens. And for me, I always try and be aware enough that my so-called quote unquote friends and people in life, if it's actually my friend, I should be able to wiggle and talk about anything and suggest topics without my life and the people in it really coming down on me and threatening me with ostracization just because I don't believe what they believe. They all like chocolate and I want to have a taste of caramel, or even just pose the question of caramel. What do you guys think? And all of a sudden I'm going to be ostracized if I even mention caramel.
Yeah. I mean, but I've realized that a lot of these things, like for example, people ostracizing you and socially disapproving you to put you down and lower your status in the group and elevate themselves and all this stuff. These social dynamics, like they're going to happen no matter what you do. Right. So it's like, okay, why even worry about it? That's kind of what my approach has become. And it was very difficult for me to get to that point. But again, if we're going to continue talking about on an individual level, what can you do? Probably one of the most cliche answers is to start disregarding that ostracization stuff, right? What's that classic saying they always say? Why try to fit in when you were born to stand out? Again, cliche as all hell, but you know what? There is some truth to it. There is. And You know, why try to be in someone else's club that doesn't want you there when you can go form your own club? You know?
Well, seeing everyone here knows they're familiar with the dogma in the men's community. What are the top 3 unrealistic attitudes, expectations that men have in the men's community, or in general, in the general population? What are the top 3 most unrealistic attitudes that today's man has about today's woman?
Yeah, I can answer this. Probably for the average man. Again, I firmly believe that once you reach a certain caliber as a man, again, you get into a position where you dictate terms, but that's very rare. Again,
Right.
most men, like, you're being chosen, you're not choosing. So the average man in the West, unrealistic standard number 1 is expecting a 0 body count. That, like, listen, would it be it's a miracle if you find one, but I'm telling you, it's just unrealistic. Which is why at the beginning I said something more realistic, like, hey, if you as a man, let's say you're someone who only likes to do that within the context of a serious relationship, a woman who shares those values with you, maybe she's had a few serious boyfriends. Okay, someone like that you could probably connect with a lot more than you think you can, versus just drawing a hard line. It's got to be 0.
Right.
I think a second thing is having the expectation that, again, the cardboard cutout, you said, that a woman will just realistically want to just quit her job, stay home, and do all that stuff. In my experience, when women do have babies, do many of them actually end up going home, or at least working from home? Yes, of course, that maternal instinct, they want to care for that baby, they do anything for that baby. But realistically speaking, if you're just expecting that from the jump, you're delusional, right? Most women want to work, they want to make their own money, that's what they want to do. Yeah, and I think those are probably the big 2. And I think the third most unrealistic expectation, I think it's like talking to a wall, is to expect women to love them the same way that they're capable of loving women. But that one's kind of like in the face. But despite the fact that, like, it's talked to death, I think a lot of men haven't really internalized it. They still have a little piece of them that has that idealistic view of love, and they think that women can do it the same way that they can. But no, they can't.
Yeah, I think a lot of guys conflate a woman, the thinking that a woman can love her the same way you love her, with respect and, like, reciprocity. So obviously, like, a person should be kind, and if someone's in pain or in need, if you love them or care about them, you should offer help and be there. But the way in which they respond and how they speak and stuff, I think a lot of guys have become so black and white about it. Is like, no, she's got to respond, think, and everything as like a mirror to me. And everyone's an individual, so they conflate good values and ways to sort of treat people with, no, she's got to be exactly the same. She's got to love Dungeons and Dragons just like I do. She's got to love science fiction exactly like I do. She's got to love, she just can't appreciate it. She's got to love it like I do. And if I lose interest in it, she's got to also lose interest in the same way I do too.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree. I think that again, you just have to be able to enjoy each other. Can you do things together and it not be insufferable? Can you do that? I don't think that's difficult, right? Like I said, I don't need a woman to be, like, for example, a 5-star chef. I don't need that. But I will be honest with you, again, when it comes to, like, planning food and stuff like that, like, let's say, like, what's for dinner tonight, I'm not particularly good at it because, again, my environment, if we're going to talk about that, it wasn't really on me. And as a result of that environment, that's kind of a part of who I am, right? That's the other piece of the equation. But, like, a girl who kind of at least, like, knows, like, hey, I know places, like, where we can order food and stuff like that. It's not cooking, but you know what? It's like, okay, at least, like, she's thinking about it. That's like a halfway point for me. You know what I mean? Where, like, I can kind of, like, move around. And I think there's a lot of guys, again, they hear this manosphere stuff for the first time and they're already in, like, an angry place. And then again, the gasoline just kind of becomes these unrealistic standards and goalposts that no woman, even a woman who's earnestly trying, could ever meet. Right? Imagine a situation where you're a guy, you're in red pill rage, and there's a girl who really likes you. She really likes you. She's chosen you. But because you're just so wrapped up in your own little bubble here from your experiences on the internet, that goes right over your head. There's so many opportunities that you can miss out on just because of your state of mind. So, that's part of it too. Yeah.
Oh
And a lot
yeah,
of
like
people
I
do
look
that.
back on the last 15 to 20 years where I was right in the anti mode, anti-feminist, anti-girl power and all this. And I was just kind of logically talking about protecting myself and like almost like observing the reality of life, but in defense mode. And that really played out in my relationships. And even in subtext. I mean, I didn't spurg out and cause arguments over nothing, but I think I was in very defensive mode, and as a result, you create distance between you and a potentially happy relationship. So I agree. The more you're in that, the harder it is, and you can't just blame women for that. So I would also ask. Boffin already said like what are three what is it, unrealistic. What would you say, what would be some realistic, like one or two very realistic standards that every guy would agree on would be a realistic standard that they could expect from a woman?
That she's an actual woman, that would be at the top of the list.
Yeah.
Geez,
For starters.
Well, if she says she's Khaoru, she
We're
is.
talking about the others
Well,
now?
but before we go into those answers, I'd be curious to hear more options on Boffin's question before we move on to that.
Yeah,
because I have a couple of other things that I think should be added to the list, but I'm curious what the other people in the room think.
Yeah, sure.
I'll add one to it. I think Pete has a pretty typical list, a pretty good list. I'll add one to it. I've heard a lot of talk, at least in corners of the men's community, where it seems like the advice they're giving men is to concentrate on your education, concentrate on making money when you're young, which I think is solid advice within reasonable parameters. But wait until you're 30 or 35 years old and established before you even think about getting into a relationship with a woman.
Yeah, that you just I'm sorry, Buff. I didn't mean to cut you off. You just triggered
go ahead.
a saying that I hear all the time in my head. The idea, what is it? Never get so busy making a living you forget to make a life.
Exactly.
That's a
Mhm.
good saying. That's the first time I've heard it, but that's excellent.
Mm-hmm.
But also, I'd like to think, like, are you saying, Boffin, that men should ignore largely women and focus on like a career and money and like just building the structure of their life until they're 30 and then decide to look at relationships?
There are corners of the men's community that are offering that advice to men. And
It sounds
that's
almost
what
like it almost sounds like
Yep.
a feminist offering.
That's exactly
too.
why I asked that question.
Yeah, because like the women are like, hey, why don't you focus on your career? And it's like, well, how are we going to solve the problem? Oh, we're just going to copy what the women are doing. Is that really going to solve the problem? Good
I
question.
don't know. That's what I'm trying to say.
Well, they're kind of mimicking, the defensively, like the enemy strategy. Like, how can we defeat them? We'll just oppose them with the same weapons.
Yeah.
A lot of materialism and vanity, honestly.
Well, the scary thing is men are very attuned to the outside world and things. So, cars and money and status and like all these things outside of yourself, men gravitate towards that very easily, and structurally they know how to make sense of it. So that's kind of dangerous because men can kind of really drift out to sea on that very easily.
Yeah, I think honestly, if we're playing a competition of who can climb these meritocracy based ladders and stuff like that, yes, men probably would win in that intersex competition. But again, what's the point of having all that material possession and vanity if you have no connection with not just with women, but just with anyone? Another thing, I heard a song from this rapper Hobson, Alone With Me. He's like, how could you be so rich and feel so empty? It's just like you have everything you ever wanted, but it's like, it's another cliche thing. It's not the answer. It's not the answer. We're running from the problem.
Well, this is the thing by all men, regardless of what personality type they are, right? You could be an extrovert, an introvert, or whatever. Like there's all these variations, but they're the main two, introvert, extrovert, right? Like I've mentioned in one or two videos, like all of the mentoring online is coming from the Tony Robbins style, Andrew Tate kind of extroverted mentors who are materialistic. But the majority of society, especially today, that live online, everyone, if they're not a born introvert, they're conditioned to be introverts simply because of the online medium, right? So everyone lives largely introverted lives, and everyone's being spoken to and taught by these materialistic, extroverted, bright white teeth kind of people with jets. And so what are you going to learn, really?
Yeah.
Well, I can't relate to them. I'm an accountant, right? So like, I can tell you how to have a very structured life. I can tell you how to do that. But again, yeah, sometimes like when I listen to people like that, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that all the ideas that those types of men say are bad. I'm not saying that by any stretch of the imagination. Putting who they are as people and what their actions are in life aside, the ideas are separate from the people. But sometimes there's just ideas that they say. It's like, as an introvert, I just can't relate to them. So it's like, hey, Peter, just go and do that. It's like, oh yeah, it's that easy. Just go and do it. It's like, yeah, well, when you have more of a proclivity to be extroverted in the first place, you might be more attuned to things like taking risks and stuff. While a more risk averse person like me is like looking at this like, yeah, it's not that easy just to motivate myself to do that. It doesn't stop me from trying, but it's going to take me a little longer. So give me a few minutes. That's kind of how I look at it.
What are some
Anything else on the
what are
list?
some more what are some more unrealistic expectations that guys might have?
I'll just add a follow-up to that idea of waiting until you're 30 or 35 to start any type of serious relationship. If any of you guys have ever dated a woman that's dramatically younger than you realize that in most cases there's probably not a lot that you're going to have in common, which I think makes any type of long-term relationship not impossible, but a lot more difficult to establish and maintain. So if the men's community is advising men to wait until they're 30 or 35 years old, they go out and they test the waters with some young women, 20, 22, 25, and they realize that they don't have much in common. So they move closer to their age range. Well, the reality is that how many 30-year-old women are you going to meet that are virgins or even have a low body count? And there's a high probability they're going to have children. So it's kind of a compounding error. If the men's community is really holding out the idea that you have to wait until you're almost middle-aged to get serious about a long-term relationship, there's a whole host of problems that are going to follow along behind that idea.
Yeah,
And
I agree.
And I think that's one of those unrealistic attitudes that's kind of formed in the men's community in a very generic sense, but it's still kind of an attitude that you hear routinely talked about.
Yeah, I would say, there are obviously general observations that apply to many cases, and that's kind of what we talk about in the space is just generalities. But it doesn't mean like, oh, what? You're only 23? Sorry, that wonderful exception just walked through the door, but you're gonna have to ignore her because you got to wait till 30. If you're adhering to it that heavily, it's just beyond reason at that point. Yeah, you have to kind of be realistic.
But that's the issue, Pete, because everything that they talk about is generalities. You almost never in these spaces, at least when there's a group chat, hear about the particulars of a situation. You have to wait for months on end until you realize that a lot of the times it's not the woman that was to blame in a lot of these situations.
Yeah, my approach is get educated on what the generalities are because there's a reason generalities are exactly that, generalities. Get educated on it. Don't really have an emotional value attached into it. Don't invest your identity into these ideas. I'm not saying do that, but just get educated, get the information, understand the generalities. Don't live your life by the exceptions to the rule. But if an exception to the rule comes along, don't just ignore that, right?
Right.
Like if you get to experience that, don't pass it up, is what I'm saying. At least, humor your curiosity. Go check it out, versus just saying, nope, the general rule says this, so I'm just going to ignore it. It's like, no, don't do that. Yeah, like I said, once you do that, then you're kind of taking generality and you're trying to convert it to an absolute, which again, I strongly advise against.
Yeah.
Any other things that you guys can think about, or should I go?
Go ahead, Khaoru.
Well, I think that one of the biggest mistakes that I at least see happening in the community is that they think that all women are the same, like regardless of status, country, and everything else under their belt. For some reason, they're all cookie cutters, reproductions of one another, and it doesn't matter what her likes, dislikes are. If she acts different, she's still a woman, and she's going to act exactly the same as anyone else in their shoes. but surprisingly enough, somehow they always manage to date strippers, and they expect different results.
No, that's a good point.
The other issue is that you look at them, and it kind of relates to the first one, is that women are bots and they're not people. And that somehow, if you go through this checklist of make money, go to the gym, somehow you're going to find happiness. Well, in my experience, if you fish with a certain kind of bait, you're going to attract a very specific kind of fish. So if you have these swaths of men now that are following certain channels, and all they're doing is they're going to the gym and they're making money, the way I see it is that you have an increasing number of men that are fighting for a very particular type of woman. And the result of that is that you're going to get women that are extremely entitled, because now the numbers of men that they find that find them attractive and vice versa just keeps going up. You have an ever increasing pool of men hitting on a very particular type of woman. Because think about the exposure that you have as a guy like that. If you make money and you go to the gym, you're going to have women around you that go to the gym and that probably hang out in circles that also make a lot of money, or around guys that make a lot of money. So you have this ever increasing competition for the same pool of women. You never get to look outside of that circle. I've never seen a guy give the advice of, well, you know what, maybe you should go and try ballroom dancing. Because, you go into one of those environments and you have 10 women and one guy in a room, and then you get exposure to a very different kind of person.
Yeah, I
Yep.
agree. I say that if you're looking for casual fun, then then you're probably hanging out trying to get in the VIP section in the club. But again, you're not falling in love there. So I think there's a lot of guys again where sometimes by how do I say this? Taking the manosphere information out of context, what they do is they do the same thing women do, is they conflate casual with relationship. They do all the things that like a PUA would tell them to do, thinking, hey, I'm going to get the relationship. And then maybe like at best, maybe they're getting just casual fun, and then they still feel empty because it's not what they actually want. So again, that self-awareness, man, that's the foundation. It's so important. You really have to have a firm grasp on what you want before you go out into the wild.
Yeah,
And to add,
something that Khaoru said is important. I was just imagining in the future, say every guy's been taught just to be a cookie cutter, high value man. Every guy now, the baseline for all women is like, just to be considered a normal guy, not to be individual, you've got to be a fitness model who earns six figures. But basically all this kind of high value stuff is the baseline now.
Wayne.
And then all women will still want the 1% of those guys.
no, Zico, it's not Bruce Wayne, because he needs to be bald. And sometimes it's acceptable to have a beard.
Yeah.
Well, and to add one more thing to the list, and this is not particularly related to women, but it's thinking that the manosphere groups are in any way good for you beyond the information that they can provide, and that these people are your friends, and that they actually know anything about your life. So many times you'll have newcomers into some of these servers, and they're given the same platitudes over and over again. And the assumption that these guys are even able to have a business, that they're even able to have a career, or that they're able to go to the gym, or to do a bunch of other things. It's beyond me. I don't understand where this advice comes from when you know nothing about the person on the other line.
Yeah,
That's why you have to ask.
I think what it is it's more like a general probability thing rather than something targeted. So it's like, for the most part, we can conclude that women generally like dudes that are fit, and they generally like money, and they generally like, confidence, which is really more bravado, but it's just sprinkling in there. So it's like, because generally we can say with at least amount of information about you, this is mostly what women want. This is going to be the prescription. But of course, the problem is, everything you guys just said. If that is just the only, I guess, quote unquote, acceptable way to be a man or to be picked by women, then again, all you've done is raise the bar for higher and higher and higher. And eventually, it's just, it can only really go so far. It's not really something that's like sustainable.
But also think about how when guys and both women, they try and kind of push the extremes. So for instance, you have to earn a lot of money. You have to strive to be one of the top 5%. Otherwise, it's nothing. It's either or. There's a difference between realizing what women appreciate, right? They want to be made to feel safe, which
Yeah.
is, status, money, power, confidence, all that. Like, it's not that women love money; they just love feeling safe. Everything's under feeling safe. If a
Yeah.
man needs to realize one point, she just wants to be made to feel safe, and then underneath that is, okay, he's got a good job, he's big, he's taller than you, he can make you laugh, because a man who can make you laugh isn't afraid of the world, and you can stand behind him, blah blah blah. So at the top, I want to feel safe, I want to feel safe. That's all it is, right? But the point is, it's not just that women like money. Men still don't want to introspect. They want to be cookie cutters. They're very lazy philosophically about what they want, and then they complain about what they don't get personally. So rather than saying, women like money, they don't want to sit on a date and saying, well, how much do you like money? To what degree? And she might be like, well, as long as the guy has a job and we're not struggling, I don't need a mansion. As long as we can pay the bills and maybe go out for a pizza once in a while. That's very different to placing that woman that still has that degree of female nature towards like a gold digger who will throw you in the fire.
Yeah. There's layers to this stuff, right? There's a gradation, right? It's a spectrum. There's people obviously who have there's a general trait that like we all have, right? But again, how extreme the expression of these traits are, it varies from person to person. Exactly. And basically, when you're looking for a partner, you're kind of just looking like, okay, what's kind of within my range? And you're hoping that your range lines up with their range, and then you can keep the friction to a minimum. That's kind of what you're looking to do.
Well, and at the same time,
Sorry.
sorry, go ahead. No, go ahead. Well, at the same time, you need to realize that all of the things that are being talked about, they apply to people in different degrees. That's why Pete says that there are nuances. So you can sit here and talk about hypergamy the entire day, but the question is Mandy's hypergamy the same as Ellen's hypergamy, or are they fundamentally different people? And that's the point. Like, you can have a woman that likes money. Well, does she like money as much as the next one? Or is it just a general trend? And you need to look at that specific person and see, well, what does she actually like, and what's the degree to what she does? Because I have met girls out there who only date fit guys, and she doesn't care how much money he makes. She doesn't care what she looks like. She needs to be super fit. And if she finds a more shredded guy than the other one, she's going to date that guy. You need to look at those things, and you can't see the nuances if you just capitulate to all of the memes that you hear online.
And the only way you're going to be able to find that. Yeah, and the only way you're going to be able to find that is to go out into the real world and actually immerse yourself in those situations and assess them in real time. Yes.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah, and you can't just be realistic from your selfish lens, right? Like, a good woman is X, Y, and Z, and you don't want to, reciprocate something similar from her point of view. And there's also the fact that some guys are so blind by this, where or so myopic, where they themselves, they've got like a fast car, they like nice things, but then when a woman appreciates those, they're like, oh, well, she's a gold digger, she's going to take everything, I don't like it. It's like, you are those, and you value those too, but you're so scared and you don't trust yourself and your own judgment that you've actually found someone that sees things the same way as you, but you've insisted that you want a cookie cutter girl who's just quiet and sits at home and hates money and all these things that aren't in line with you, and then it won't work again.
And to build on that just a little bit, human, the guys in the men's community that are older, who have lived experiences and information that they absorb from the men's community, they have a much, I think that hopefully they have a much more balanced understanding of all of the stuff being discussed. The real danger, I think, in terms of what young guys get from the community, is that they have none of these prior life experiences. they don't have any. There's no balance to the way they think about any of this. So they come into the men's community, and right out of the bat, right off the bat, their expectations are influenced by everything they're hearing, and I think they're more apt to adapt and internalize a lot of these unrealistic attitudes about women, um, simply because this is what's being discussed. This is what's being presented to them. They have no life experience to kind of temper some of these ideas. So while the example you gave of the guy with the car and the money and the the concerns that he has, he may have developed those attitudes about women because of prior experiences he had in life. The young guy coming into the community and hearing this is kind of the foundations that are being laid for him. All women have this attitude. All women are going to take your stuff. All women are hypergamous.
Oh, but exactly, that's the point. They are, but to different degrees.
Yes.
And you're going to have to interact with that entire system based on the woman that you're talking with. You're going to have
Yes.
one that has hypergamy. If we're putting all of these things on a scale, let's say that you have all the things that the manosphere talks about from 1 to 10. Like, you're going to interact with one that has a hypergamy level of 2, and the other girl next to her has a hypergamy level of 9.
Yes.
And those two people will interact very differently, and they'll like very different things. You can't use cookie cutter solutions for complex problems. Yes, you will have generalities, you will have things you will observe. And if you only look at hypergamy, yes, you're going to see that both women have that thing in common. But the important part there is what's the degree to which they have them in common, or what's the degree to which the person I'm interacting with is going to act in that direction.
Exactly.
And experiences will help you determine your tolerance threshold.
Yep.
Yes, exactly.
And also, like, it makes me think like a lot of guys are developing, because the meme of the world is very female based now. Guys are adopting feminine philosophy, because that's about the only messaging that gets out there publicly. A guy really needs to dig to find out a balanced, objective way of relating with women and what's fairer. And he has to have a willingness to go back in history and ask, grandfathers and so on and so forth. But today, even he kind of thinks like women, the average guy today, that's trying to, because he's still trying to work out what women want. And so he's going to her rule book and her mentality, which isn't the way a man thinks anyway, and what he wants. And so he'll think, I want a woman is always in my frame, doesn't think of herself, never says no to me, blah, blah, blah. Well, it's not realistic, because if you meet a person like that, she said yes to everybody else as well. She this fantasy that she's completely online and compliant to only you, doesn't have a spine, loves cooking, all this sort of stuff. Like, you have to realize there's degrees, any more than sort of women they love bad boys, but the bad boy's only a bad boy to every other woman except for her.
Yep.
That's why 50 Shades of Grey was so popular. I'm going to change this sociopath and have a baby because I'm special. Guys need to realize, like, well, if this woman is this way, what is the degree to which she's got, hypergamy, anger issues? How much does she want a baby? That's a tricky one, because a woman, even if she wants a little bit, that you shouldn't even touch that. You only want to, if you want kids, you want a woman who wants kids to a little degree or to a large degree. But if you don't want kids, I would say don't pick a woman that wants kids even a little bit.
Right.
But you know what I mean? Like, so the degree, you have to be aware enough and realistic enough, because I think a lot of these cookie cutter solutions, they're very unrealistic. They put people outside of like the human beings that they are.
Well, not to mention that the way they judge a lot of things are way out of whack. To give you an example, a couple of days ago, a guy posted a meme from 4chan where this young dude, he started a relationship with an older woman. They got along amazing. She treats him great. She whatever. The woman happened to have a kid, And the guy absolutely loved the kid as well. The kid liked him as well. They had things in common. He was taking him out to look at dinosaurs and all these other things. And he was getting treated exceptionally well. And this thing was going on for, I think, about a year or two. And the guy was thinking about asking the woman to marry him. And for a group of guys that constantly complain about young children not having male father figures or male father figures in their lives, the response that you would get from a typical manosphere server is, you're going in there and you're raising somebody else's kid. And here you have an individual that's willing to make that sacrifice, and he's willing to be a father to someone that isn't his kid, and give him a role model and potentially be the figure that these guys are constantly complaining about. Yet he's getting shamed by that, even though the guy's happy by his own admission.
You know what's sadder about that? A guy could actually get in one of these manosphere groups and actually explain all the points at which they're compatible, and all of these kind of manosphere types that are very black and white. Well, they'll say, well, you can't marry a single mum. That's it. That's the rule.
Right.
And it doesn't matter if you say we're compatible, we like the same things. I've wanted a kid, I've never been able to have one. Here's a ready-made kid that's perfect. I wish I gave birth to this kid. We get along. There's actually no problem. But your rule says no matter what, no matter the personal subjective qualities of within my relationship, I'm supposed to say no because, I don't know, because of your rules. So I can either be realistic and have a chance at my own happiness, or I can find the group of you idiots more important and get rid of that. And in my private life, I'll be alone and just typing with you guys on the on message forums.
Right.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I would say personally, I personally have no interest in raising someone else's kid, but like I've always been like that. You know, it's not like, hey, someone convinced me to be like that. I've always been like that. But I think a secondary reason why, like for me, it's problematic is that if the relationship doesn't work out, I don't just lose one, I lose two people.
And I completely understand that, but it's again, it's about the nuance of the situation. The guy says he's happy and he's okay with it. Like,
Oh, it's not going to be me raining on his parade. No, do what you want.
Exactly, and that's the point. Like, don't try to convince somebody else to live by your standards.
Do you want kids, Pete?
To be honest, I've kind of leaned in the no camp for a really long time. And now that I'm like 32, I'm going to be 33 in March. You know, it's looking like that's kind of how it's going to play out, you know?
Right.
And so me, I'm kind of resigned to the real distinct possibility that I'm not going to have kids anyway. But to me, that's not really the end of the world. So the short answer is I think I'm in the no camp. I have entertained the thought in my head a few times over the years, but never like deeply entertained it.
Yeah. The point I was going to make, you made the point of, you know, getting involved with someone that already has a kid, and then if the relationship doesn't work, you lose, you know, not only the woman but the child that you become attached to. And you know, it's one of those risk assessment things, but again, I think you always have to consider reality, and the reality is, even if it was your biological child, you'd still be facing the same problem. And it may even be, you know, a bigger problem for you emotionally.
True.
It
It probably would hurt more if it's your own biological kid that's being kept from you as a
Yeah.
result of the system. I agree with that. But yeah, I mean beyond that, again, like I said before, I even mentioned the losing the two relationship thing. It's just something about it for me personally, it just doesn't sit right. Like very much like we were just talking about, hey, hypergamous instinct is a spectrum. You know, internal repulsion response by the idea of raising someone else's kid. That's a spectrum for men, right? And for me, it's just strong. I just look at it and it's just like, yeah, I don't think I want to do that. Can't really explain why fully I'm feeling the way I'm feeling, but that's my instincts. That's what they tell me. And
Yeah.
it's like, okay, if I'm going to have a kid, I want it to be mine. That's just if I'm going to. And my default is kind of like, not really. But if I'm going to have one, I want it to be mine.
Yep. Well, I think one of the other realistic attitudes that comes out of the men's community that I've noticed when you hang around and interact with a lot of the guys is that I think there's kind of an attitude that's developed that they have convinced themselves that all of this is so risky that the only way to evolve problems is just disengage.
The only way to win is not to play.
And that was you made a video about that recently, Human. And but if you think about it, it really is a lot of these guys dwell on these generic issues and talk amongst themselves and churn it in their head. And of course, all of the worst case examples make it into the discussion in the men's community. You can always find a video about some crazy woman that's done something. And that becomes internalized, I think, in a lot of these guys' minds. And the reality is there is no way to create a zero risk situation for yourself.
Well, and also, like, it focuses on, well, nothing bad will happen to me. That's right. But how many ask, well, how little good will happen to you from that position either?
But here's a different question and a different way to think about it. Why are you taking advice on relationships from guys that don't have relationships?
Well, that's a whole separate conversation, but that's what we would call an argument from authority, right? Like if, for example, a chemist says that CO2 is water. You and I both know that chemist is wrong, but we're not going to lend them credence just because they're a chemist. But if the accountant says that H2O is water, you're not going to be like, hey, where's your chemistry degree? But here's the thing. If the information, the idea in and of itself is shit, call out the idea for what it is. Shit. But if someone's saying a factual thing or a good idea, you can't just discredit that just because of things like that. I just wanted to put that out there.
No. That's a perfect. That's a perfectly reasonable thing. But on average, if you look at the type of content creators within the manosphere, like it's hard to look at that entire group and say, well, you know what? There's not a level of bias there, considering that none of them have any type of normal, well, not normal, but have never had happy relationships inside.
Well, yeah, because underneath that advice is venting anger and venting depression and things like this. I'm guilty of this too. I'm no exception to the rule. However, I do think, again, very much like how experience is probably the ultimate teacher, there is an alternative teacher. For example, myself, I learned a lot about what not to do by watching my older brother. Probably one of the greatest benefits of having an older brother is they make all the decisions before you do. So you can kind of see where they went right, where they went wrong. And then you're like, okay, I'm going to do that. I'm not going to do that. And plus also, I think we mentioned this in the last time we got together and had a chat, just kind of seeing what a model relationship looked like with my parents. Not perfect, but, pretty damn good. It helps, even if you personally didn't get to experience that just yet. So that's also a variable.
What did you ask, Khaoru?
Why they're taking advice from? Why is it that all of these guys are taking advice from guys that never had a successful relationship in their lives, particularly when it comes to relationships?
Yeah, I remember getting annoyed years ago. Now, like, I don't kind of care because I'm not in sort of I don't belong to sort of the MGTOW group or anything. But even then, when I started to realize how black and white it was and how you weren't allowed to talk about certain things, when I wanted to have a recorded conversation, it never eventuated. But I wanted to chat with a guy who was married, and he was following my channel, and he left really incisive comments, right from the front line of being married. And you got all this pushback, I remember, from guys. I remember on the server when I was saying, oh, I'm going to talk to this guy, I was thinking about doing this video. And there's people like, oh, what are you talking to him for, Human? He's like, he's a simp. He's not part of us and things like this. And I'm thinking, do you want to be realistic and be informed about this stuff and really know the truth and wrap your head around it and then kind of chew on it and form your own ethics and make your own decisions? Or do you just want to kind of sit in your echo chamber?
Exactly. Yeah. That's another thing too. This is why I say, hey, listen, you want to take some ideas from the manosphere, that's great, but you shouldn't make it a fundamental part of your identity. Because then whenever the idea gets attacked, you feel like you're being attacked and then no growth can happen, which is a problem.
Yep.
the cliche is misery love company, but also like they don't talk about happiness loves company as well. And I think that like if you take the step of like getting fed up with the misery part that starts to kind of just be memes in certain pockets of male self-help, it's like, you know what, I'm tired of this. It's like a parrot, and like my life isn't better. Like I can try and repeat this stuff and even try and practice it, and my life is the same or worse. And my instinct is telling me, hey, why not try the opposite? Or why not step to the left and, you know, bear this in mind, but try it a different way, speak a different way, take a different posture. And I think just a lot of guys are just not afraid. I don't want to use the wrong word, but they're just too comfortable in a position with friends that they have like a social outlet, and it's very predictable. And it's the opposite of the unpredictability and chaos they had with a former ex-girlfriend, right? So they want to get as far away from their past experiences, and a lot of what they feel in a lot of these men's community is the opposite of that. But it can also be an anchor that makes it very hard for you to kind of move forward in your own life.
Exactly. They get stuck in the emotions. Again, I call it the nihilistic valley. They get stuck in those feelings and they never properly process them, as well as all the traumas from their past that came with that, so that they can actually just sit with it. And then
you know what it's like in these nihilistic valleys? It's like academic conversations between people. Like if I'm trying to have a more practical, ethical discussion about say a philosophical position in life, how we can work this out and what I can do in my life. These people who just spit out the memes, they're like those philosophical discussions when you're saying, oh, I want to find out the truth of this. I want to find out what's real. And all they come back with is, what is truth? How do you know? And it's always these questions that just keep them in that valley of nihilism.
Well, even if you never find it, the search never stops. You know, like what's the harm in searching for it? Best case scenario, you get very valuable information that's going to improve your life. What's wrong with pursuing that? That's how I look at it.
Yeah, it's like people talking about writing all the time, and no one actually writes a short story.
Right.
Well, you also forget that a lot of the times these circles aren't used to learn something. It's like Pete said, they're either used to vent and as a way to socially interact, because it's the easiest way to be able to relate to someone. Like think of the topics that are usually discussed around the water cooler or everywhere else. You talk about the weather, you talk about anything else, and you talk about women, and you talk about politics. These are kind of the only topics that are an easy bridge to find between two guys. They can talk about this, and they suddenly feel that they can build a bit of rapport, and that they can have a bit of a higher place in the hierarchy. Not only that, add a couple of extra words in there that make you think like you're talking a bit like a scientist, or that you have a bit of knowledge, and suddenly you feel you're like the alpha in the room. And this is how they use these circles. They don't care about solving some of them obviously don't care about solving the issues that they have, and so on and so forth. It's just a place where you can easily jump in, have a conversation for a half hour or two, then go out, and tomorrow you can rinse and repeat.
Yeah. I've said it that most of the popular men's self-help is not information, it's more entertainment. People are being entertained by this stuff. So they'll watch a response video. And I notice this when I do a response video, on the rare occasion that I actually find something to say about people's bad behavior, or a woman says something and I want to kind of elucidate a point that people aren't talking about. But I notice that those videos, I get 10 times the views compared to when I do a normal video on sort of the normal stuff I do.
Yep. Yeah, think about it. Why do people read the newspaper? Bad news. Why do people watch the news? Bad news. That's what people want. They want that stuff that's sensationalized, you know?
Yeah. It's funny, like people aren't interested in a mundane, calm, good, well-functioning relationship. They want the chaotic excitement pre-relationship, like how do you get a woman, or they're interested in the aftermath of a wreckage. But no one's interested in the boring, how do you get a woman? How do you get a man? Well, it's pretty mundane, and it's just your voice is very even, and you describe it. It's a very rudimentary way. It's like when people want to know how to get fit. You talk about the fundamentals of diet and exercise, like, nah, it's boring. You have to give me some pill, some magic 3-step formula. No one's interested in the mundane way that will actually guarantee you, not guarantee, but give you the highest likely sort of chance of getting what you want. No one wants that because it's boring.
The path of least resistance, and I think in the context of relationships, they want an eternal honeymoon phase, and it
Yeah.
just doesn't exist unless you're like relationship hopping like every 2 years and renewing your honeymoon phase every 2 years. Yeah, you're just not going to get that. Yeah, it takes work.
And think about this other layer to the problem that they have, where you have a guy that says, I want a woman that likes the same things that I do, and all of the other cliches that you tend to find. It's, well, you are going to find a woman that likes the things that you do. She's not going to be into those things to the same degree that you are. Because just thinking about the social group that women have in general, and on average, obviously, like, she's going to go through her life dating multiple partners, way more than you on average, and she's going to have exposure to a lot more things than you're going to have. Because guys tend to keep with the same things in their lives for years on end. If you like gaming when you were 5 years old, chances are you're probably going to like to game in your 30s and 40s and 60s. Women, on the other hand, they get the luxury of being exposed not just to the gamer, they get exposed to the rocker, to the guy that's like Andrew Tate, to the guy that's like whoever the hell he is. And she gets this way better developed palette of what she actually likes, and so on and so forth. But at the same time, she's not going to have the same deep appreciation that you have for the things that you enjoy. And that's just going to be a level of frustration for both of you, because she's going to go through life and pick different things from every guy that she's met that she kind of wants to have at a certain level. And you're going to be frustrated. Well, you know what? She's not a real gamer. She likes to play a game from time to time, but she's not like me. We're not really compatible. And that's another expectation that guys have, which I find to be very bizarre.
Yeah,
Well,
I mean, I don't expect it, but yeah, that's from experience that I no longer expect it. So you're right.
Well, I was going to say it's the result of being on your own and being in your own echo chamber for so long. You only have a relationship with your own needs. You're not used to relating to someone else, or
Yeah.
even
Yep.
you don't know how to.
Well, to a certain degree, guys are their own worst enemies, and it's the same with women. Like, people are their own enemies when it comes to relationships and everything else in their lives. Because for a lot of things, it's mostly self-sabotage. Yes, there are instances out there where it's past trauma. It's a bunch of other things. But if you spend the time to listen to the entire story that these guys have, and if you have the luxury to sometimes find out the other side of the argument, you'll realize that it's just people being people and not talking to each other.
Yeah, but the degree to which guys are so unrealistic in terms of, they always talk about what's not fair, but they're starting to adopt so much of the unfair expectations of women. It's kind of like me, if I lived in Japan at the moment in a hotel room and I was talking to you guys, making my videos, and I could sort of sustain myself, and I didn't bother to learn the language of the people around me, and then I just complain about the Japanese culture and people, and I don't understand them, and it's stupid as that. You've got to reciprocate. You've got to realize it's, who you're dealing with, and there's another person in front of you, and you've got to relate to people around you.
Yeah, and I agree that it becomes very difficult if, like, for the longest time you've just been on your own. I mean, yeah, when you guys said that, I kind of felt that, where it's like, yeah, you're so used to just kind of living life on your terms and your rules that it's like, all right, try to see things from a different perspective. It can be done, but again, the longer you're on your own, it seems that the more difficult it becomes, and we're sort of enabling that in this atomized world.
It seems to be with everything in life, from your health. Like the longer you let your health go, it'll pass a point where it's irrecoverable. The same with like how you're conditioning yourself and for how long in relationships and that concrete sets. And no matter how much you want it to change and you're ready for a family in your 30s or 40s, it's just like the chances are like winning the lottery that'll happen. You can have a romantic view of it all you want to help you wake up in the morning so you can feel motivated. But the longer you keep doing bad thing, the deeper the hole gets dug, and at some point that you just can't reach high enough to get out of the hole. So and that goes for men and women.
Yeah,
And
and
thinking. Go ahead, Pete.
yeah, and I was going to say, and that's just where the nihilistic valley comes from. That's where it comes from, because you just feel so hopeless. You're just stuck in there, and it's like you have to change to get out, but it's like you've been this way for so long. It's like, how do I change? And it's not something that's easy to do. But again, I'm not saying it can't be done, but it's not easy to do. So I do empathize to some degree with guys who get stuck in there. Yeah.
Well, and to move it back a bit, because Human mentioned being in Japan in a hotel room. Here's another question that these guys need to think about: is a chat in Japan the same as a chat in Europe, or the same as a chat in North Korea?
I would
Or
say
in
that
Africa?
I would say that the criteria to be viewed as such might be more lenient in some places than in others, which is why we're seeing the whole passport bros / geomax thing kind of be on the uptick. There's places where basically like you'll get treated better than you would here. Now, yeah, whether or not that's right or wrong, I mean, doesn't matter. It's not going to stop them from doing it. The point is people are doing it. And now the people that don't like the fact that people are doing it, they have to look at that and take stock and be like, all right, is there anything we could do to kind of like reverse this trend? You know, but the short answer is like, yeah, the definition of what a Chad is, it does vary from place to place. Yes. And that's why you see these migration patterns.
Well, and not just the migration patterns, because if you're willing to look at that, that comes with its own level of delusion. Because I've heard a lot of guys that don't want a geomax, but they want to go to certain places because of the prostitution scene or whatever the hell, and they
Correct.
the
Yep.
same way they look at the I want a 1950s wife in 2023. They also are completely ignorant to the fact that these places also change. Like the Philippines from 50 years ago isn't the same as the Philippines that you have now. You're not going to.
Yeah. It's always stems from that self-awareness, you know? Again, if a guy is like talking about finding marriage in another country, but deep down what he really wants is just to run through the, you know, the prostitution rings and stuff. Again, that's a man not being honest with himself. So one, you have to be honest. But generally what I say to guys who are looking at Geomax, it's like, look, man, it's not just go over there and get a wife. Like you got to learn the culture, you got to learn the language. It's a huge life change if you're going to do that. And I think a lot of guys don't fully grasp the gravity of the life change required to make that work from a logistical standpoint as well.
Yeah, and you're going to have to live there. You can't bring her over where you are.
Right, because again, here in the West, we have a different environment that teaches different things, and that could have an impact on how people express themselves in said environment. Correct.
And again, it's about the exposure as well, because you look at the place like the Philippines, and I can understand that a couple of decades ago, you just by default, just by existing as an average white guy, you would have been appreciated there as the scarce resource. You look different, you look whatever, you're taller and whatever the hell. But during all of these decades where the borders have been open and so on and so forth, they know what a good looking white guy looks like. You're not going to have as easy a time as you think you are, especially
Correct.
these guys that think that they're going to go to Japan and everything is going to get fixed.
Right.
Like,
Like
if you go to Tokyo, there are a lot of white guys in Tokyo.
Yes, and I was about to bring that up too. Like again, before the Philippines, Japan used to be like that, right? But now Japan's not like
Yep.
that. And before that, South Korea was like that, and now it's not like that. So yeah, it's changing. Like, you know, 20 years ago, a 4 out of 10 in the face guy, you know, you could probably go over there and be all right.
Exactly.
But now like sixes are going over there. So it's because sixes are having a hard time back here in the West. So they're like, you know what? I'm going to go over there. I'm like a 6 here. I'm probably like a god over there. And then they just go over there and then they take it right out from under the 4s. So yeah, that male competition, regardless of where it migrates to, that's always going to be a thing. You can't escape it.
Yeah, and you can't ignore the fact that things evolve over time. The same way women's standards evolve, and whether you like those standards or not, because that's a different thing. Like, it's one thing to have a standard of I just want a guy that's at home and he brings the money and I can just cook and clean. It's another thing to live a life where you are also social and you are exposed to different things And now, well, I don't just want a guy that provides. I also want someone that's fun and kind of has a bit of things in common with me. And I also don't want him to look like a slob because I get to pick now. All of these things are natural, and looking at them in a vacuum and just saying, well, you know what, there's no way that this is going to happen. Sometimes you need to look in the mirror as well and say, well, you know what, maybe I'm not good enough. Yeah, sometimes it's somebody that's just being vile to you and treating you poorly. But a lot of the times, well, you know what, maybe I'm not good enough, and I'm not looking in my own backyard to see what the types of people that might fit with me are.
Especially if you're asking for things that you yourself refuse to give, like your standards in another person are way higher than what you objectively are.
Yeah, true. And I think, also just to extend it again, back to the topic of the two-way street though. If you did meet the standards, you'd get picked. It's as simple as that when you're a guy.
Exactly.
Right? So, but here's the thing though. On the flip side with the ladies, because the ladies look at it like, well, I have so many options, so I can do whatever I want. Not true. You don't care about what the standards of a guy like me that you're not interested in is. Sure, you don't care about my standards. I'm just some loser. You don't care. But the guy that you do want, guess what? He has standards too. So it's like, okay, you have to be very mindful of what the guy you picked wants, because guess what's going to happen if you don't think about that? You're not going to get that guy. And this is where have all the good men gone crap comes from, because they go to these guys. The guys realize, hey, she ain't got what I want. And it's like, the fact that you picked me, that doesn't mean anything because you don't have what I value. And that's the nature of the beast.
Well, and since we like to bring up hypergamy, why does nobody ever bring up male hypergamy? Or the idea that X gender is the gatekeeper of whatever. Like, honestly, I don't think that any fat chick ever gatekept everything for me because she's not on my radar. like the only people that can gatekeep things from you are the people that you're interested in.
Right. Of course. It's just that, again, the number of women that men as a whole in general are interested in is a much larger pool than the other way around, which is why women are the selectors and they choose you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But that being said, I would say that, yes, men are hypergamous in some sense. For example, they want a woman that's probably better looking than they are. That would be ideal. They probably want a woman that probably outspecs them in chastity. They probably want that. A woman that outspecs them in femininity, while for women, they want the reverse. They want a man who's more masculine. I think there are certain traits. It's just that what men want the other party, the women, to have more of than them is different from what women want. Their priorities are different. But whatever their priorities are, they want the other party to have more of that thing they prioritize than they themselves do, because they see that as an improvement on their life in comparison to them staying by themselves, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and well, any guy that's ever looked at the big memory section on some of those websites, they're literally picking that over any other trait that a woman has. So that's another instance of male hypergamy.
Yep.
Yeah. And a lot of women know that, which I think is another reason why social media is just filled with women playing on their looks. The problem arises, though, when a woman picks a guy she actually wants a relationship with, and the guy she picks doesn't value that, and he does value other things. And she's like, but I thought the looks thing was enough. And he's just looking at her like, no, it's not. Not for what you want from me. And that's where it kind of falls on the back burner.
Yeah. I did a video a couple of years ago, kind of tongue in cheek, but kind of half serious to make guys think about who they're choosing and settling. And I said, how many guys who are in relationships from girlfriend to married, how many of you, if you won the lottery, would you leave your wife?
Yeah, it
got a few interesting responses, because I thought, like, well, think about it. A lot of guys feel like, oh, this is good enough. This is the best I could get. Now, when you can get, with money, you could get the hottest gold digging bimbos and have, get 3 of them at one time, and they would all be happy and nod to you and never give you a problem because daddy's paying the bills. Like, how many of you would let go of your good enough situation and monkey branch to a better one?
Right. Yeah. Because again, I think it works in both directions. Yep. Again, it takes a lot of discipline to oppose the MS-DOS, right? It really does. Even if living in a Windows 11 world, it can be done though, But that being said, yeah, most people are only as loyal as their options. That's the sad truth. And the reality is that women have a lot more options than men do. So that saying tends to kind of be thrown at women a lot more. It doesn't mean that men don't have the propensity to exercise similar behavior. It's just that men don't have as many opportunities to exercise that behavior.
Yeah, a lot of these cliche things that men bring up, like women do this. She was married to him, then she just left him and left for this young dude. And it's like, say you reversed it, how many of us wouldn't do the same thing? We'd hope we wouldn't, but
Yeah.
say the lottery example, you're given the lottery. All you have to do is say yes to a threesome with 3 Victoria's Secret models because they want to, and you've got the opportunity. You're going to say, no, sorry, ladies, I made a promise to that couch walrus over there.
Yeah. Bill Burr made a funny joke about Tiger Woods. He was like, as an average man, you think you're tempted at that level? Sorry, ladies, got to go home to the wife. It's like again, once you're actually tempted at that level, again, it's a novel experience for the average man. So yeah, I think a lot more men fold than we think.
If where you are in life, the temptation that's given to you is very, very low, right? But then if you can get to a position, say like a lot of women, where they can be tempted by a lot more at a higher level, a high quality level, yeah, morally, if you've promised this, or if you say you value this, morally, you should value it. And say, whether it's a guy or a girl, a guy who leaves his wife or whatever, I think more guys would own up and say, yeah, I left her, but fuck it. Whereas a woman would generally use word salad to justify, I was looking for love and he wasn't home enough and blah, blah, blah. So I think if both people are like that, both would monkey branch if honest, although men have a bit or a lot more honor to push them to cross the line of temptation.
Right. Yeah. Like I said, for me, it's totally okay. It's going to hurt like hell, but if a woman's just straight up with me and breaks up with me before she takes any action, yeah, it sucks. Yeah, you're gonna feel that pang of betrayal, if you even want to call it that. But that's still infinitely better than just flat out infidelity. You know what I mean? So, and again, when you kind of intuitively understand how this monkey branching stuff works, yeah, women have more opportunities to do it, but men are capable of it as well. See someone like Leonardo DiCaprio, for example. Yeah, as long as again, you're not blatantly disrespectful about it, committing infidelity and stuff like this. Yeah, it's still kind of a kick in the teeth, but then there's a lot of men out there, like I said. I think one of you said the best way to avoid the pain is to not play the game, right? A lot of men just kind of look at it like that. Well, no, I want guarantees that I'll never feel this. Well, you're just not gonna get that. Part of life is pain, and pain is what makes you appreciate the good things too. You couldn't.
And uncertainty as well is where you learn different things and go down paths where you would not have gone down if everything was so structured and safe.
Exactly.
You just keep repeating the echo chamber, which is what a lot of people do. And it's safe and it feels good and familiar. You're cozy. It's a warm blanket. But this is the thing. You look at people, whether it's Andrew Tate or CEOs or anybody, realistically, like someone who's got a great relationship and you see the way they talk, do you really listen to them talk and you see their status and everything they've done? Do you really think, and it's not just that they were safe, do you really think that was like luck? Or was it skill and calculated risk and doing the things you knew you should do, but you were just too lazy or scared to sort of do it? Because, I can justify lexically every reason why I shouldn't, but I don't want to look at every reason why I should.
Yeah.
I wanted to go pose a question I did earlier. What are some good qualities, objectively realistic good qualities that you see most men should or would, and I would say offer should, even though guys can make their own decisions, but some better advice, like what are good qualities, objective ones that guys should have rather than their cookie cutter black and white impersonal answers?
Well, I think a woman who takes the act of sex seriously, right? I think that's a little more realistic than be a virgin. You know what I mean? Like you don't just give that away. I think that's kind of what it is, because it's if you just give it away, it implies you don't value it. And if you don't value it, why should I value it? And, I agree. You're definitely in a better position to ask for something like that if you yourself practice what you preach. I'd like to think I do. So I think that's very important. But I think a realistic thing would be like, hey, what's wrong with wanting the thing that makes women women, their femininity? What's wrong with wanting that? Just like, I like, again, women say, I'm a boss babe, I'm a this, they're giving that masculine energy. And usually, again, because most men, they're afraid to lose the girl, they'll just sit there and eat it. But if a man started walking around acting all feminine and flamboyant, women would be like, ugh, what's that? Get that out of there. And nobody even bats an eye. So I think like, that's a reasonable standard, with the whole femininity, masculinity dynamic. I just think we're at our best when we're kind of giving one another the things that we lack ourselves to just sort of kind of get this yin yang mesh. And yeah, just common values, similar moral compasses. I just think you can't have someone who has a different grasp of morality. I'm not saying you have to be perfectly aligned, but you got to be in the same ballpark. And I think that's much more realistic than just the cut and dry, like it's got to be this, it's got to be that. And if it's not that, well, then I'm not dating her. Well, then you're going to be single for a long time. That's probably what's going to happen. Yeah.
What about you guys?
I got to be honest with you, Human. I don't have a good answer to that question. When you hang around in the men's community, there's kind of the standard list of answers that I think the average guy will give you, and I think they're kind of universal. I think if I had to say something a little bit different, I would say look for maturity in a very holistic sense. Look for a woman that has started on the path to who's come to the realization that she has to develop a level of maturity past kind of the typical woman that men talk about all the time in these communities.
Right.
But
Right. Kind of getting past that like attention seeking, instant gratification, hedonistic treadmill stuff. Yeah.
because honestly, one of the most educational things for me in the men's community and talking to a lot of guys is that I've come to the realization that once you get past the generic conversation about what a guy's looking for in a woman, you realize that depending on the age, the demographics, the place you live in the world, your cultural background, guys have a very different list of the detailed things that they really find attractive in a woman. So I don't there's not an easy answer for me past what men talk about in general.
Yeah. I think though, but like even like again, I think like my three are just sort of placeholders. But if you're putting all that to the side though, like not making it a male gendered specific answer, you're just kind of making it more gender neutral. I think it's important that the two people in question trust each other. I think that goes without saying. Respect, that's important. They have to kind of be able to they admire each other in the sense that like they're inspired by one another, they motivate one another and all that. And I think the most important one is like, well, you gotta desire each other because if you don't desire each other, then as far as I'm concerned,
Yeah.
you're just friends, right? So I mean, those are probably the big four. I would say that like universally, it's like, hey, how could you be with someone you don't trust? How could you be with someone you don't respect or admire or even want? Like, how could you do that and actually feel fulfilled? You can't. The hard part is, though, is that both of you feel those same things for one another at the same time. And that's obviously as evidenced by, again, I know human, you don't like statistics, but as evidenced by what we observe in the world, it's not easy to do, which is what makes it so valuable.
Oh, I don't. It's not that I don't respect statistics. I think people sort of that's the only thing they look at. They don't care about what they want personally. It's all objective statistics, the laws, hypergamy, biology, female nature, all that stuff. So I do respect statistics as sort of a tool and something to sort of educate yourself on and be realistic about. But yeah, I
Right.
get what you mean.
Yeah, I mean, like, you shouldn't look at statistics and be like, okay, I'm never going to go up to the home plate with my bat getting ready to swing. I'm never going to do it because that's an absolute. Why would you do that? But it will make you more mindful of when you should walk up to the plate to take a swing versus just going up to the plate and taking a swing 100 times in a row and hoping you get a phone number. You know what I mean?
And with which ball you swing at.
Exactly. That too. Just because someone makes a pitch doesn't mean you have to hit it. What if it's a ball throw? All right, ball 4. I'll take a walk. It's just, yeah, exactly. It depends.
What about you, Khaoru? What are one or two things you look for?
Well, already assuming that the desire is there, because otherwise you wouldn't be talking to the person in the first place.
Yeah, sure.
And
Assuming
whatever,
that, yeah.
and what Pete says is a good list. But beyond that, I think that the most important thing is to have a direct level of honesty and the ability to communicate what you want. Because if you're able to say what really is important to you and what you really want, it fixes 90% of the things that you're going to have in a relationship. I talked to Boffin the other day, and he mentioned one of his friends that had an intuitive understanding of what his wife wanted. And the example that he gave was, well, she wanted to go to the seaside for a couple of days, and even though he absolutely loathed the idea, he knew that it was something that he had to do. And that's something you need to be ready for. Like, compromise is going to be part of any relationship if you want to keep your partner happy. But
Yeah.
if you don't have the ability to kind of interpret on an intuitive level what your partner wants, she needs to be able to express, this is important to me. I want to go to this concert, or I need a break, or I need to get out of the house. We need to do something, because otherwise it's going to be a problem. And if you're
Right.
able to say that about any issue, which is something that you should be able to do by default with the person that you want to spend the rest of your life with, it's going to take away 80 to 90% of all of the other shit that's going on in your life.
Yeah, pretty much again, brings it back to the dinner table on your first date, asking, "What did you mean by that?" It will clear up so many things when you understand a person's intentions versus just kind of filling in the blanks with your interpretation. And I think in terms of doing the things you don't really want to do because you really care about the other person, it's that much easier to do those things and grin and bear it when you know you've got someone who's willing to do the same thing for you because they value
Yeah.
you that much.
Yeah.
And you also,
It can't just be like some of the teaching, the only thing that exists is your frame and she needs to occupy it, and you don't have to care about or
Right.
worry about what she wants,
well, but this is the thing, human, because I've talked about this with Boffin as well. Like, the fundamental idea of a frame is that it's rigid. It never grows. It never has the potential to fit any other painting than the one that you put in it at the start. And you need to walk around with a frame that's lucky enough that somehow it encapsulates the type of person that you're going to find. So she needs to be extremely limited as well. I mean, unless you're picking a kid, the chances of that are extremely low. So instead of using the metaphor of you need to be, I don't know, like a tree that branches out and it can go around and be able to wrap around the things that are important and keep them close, and maybe not grow in a certain direction and then move, but still have the ability to be adaptable. Like, using a frame that's never going to change. I mean, you're going to have cancer tomorrow. Your life is going to completely change from rock bottom to the top. You're not going to have the same frame.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, it reminds me of when you see in movies or and documentaries where they're looking at DNA samples and they overlay one, the humans with like an ape or something, and it's like, well, we've got a 90% human a DNA match, whereas guys with girls are like, no, it's got to be 100% DNA match, otherwise I'm not dating her.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
I was
think
go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, to add on what Khaoru, the point that Khaoru just made about maintaining frame, it's one of those good generic concepts, but the serious flaw, I think, is that if you think about what the typical guy is looking for when he gets into a relationship, he actually wants, men have, I think, a tendency to want to settle into a routine.
Yeah.
And that's just a man's natural tendency. I think most men, they want to find what they like and stick with it, and they like it to stay the same. I think if men expect women to have that same attitude in a relationship, then I don't think that guy really understands the nature of women.
Yeah.
He's heard a lot of talk in the men's community, and he may adopt this idea that you can force her into the frame, but the reality is that men's idea of an ideal relationship and women's idea of an ideal relationship are different. And if you don't accept that fact, that the point Khaoru made, if you don't accept the fact that women, I think, tend to expect a more dynamic nature to the relationship, then you're going to run into problems down the road.
Well, it goes back to what I said earlier. You're interacting with a being that lived her entire life having way more experiences than you did and having way more exposure than you did. So naturally, she's going to want to relive some of those things.
Right.
Whether if it's with you or with somebody else, you're still going to have things that you like that are going to be incompatible to your man just by dint of dating another guy at a different time in your life.
Yep.
So it's unreasonable to not want to do some of the things that you used to enjoy.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
you're going to have to deal with that on some level. Yeah,
Yep.
don't pick the things that are going to make you miserable, but pick the things that you can deal with or maybe you kind of enjoy as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think though I do want to just say, like, my interpretation. I think here's the thing. I've said this already once. With men, really, it's just what you say, but with women, it's always how you say it. Like, when I interpret the word frame, really what I think is just like, don't let people violate your boundaries. Like, that's really what it is, right? Like, if you're with a woman, like, and she clearly, like, is trusting towards you, she doesn't respect you and all that, and this works the other way towards women too. It's like, again, that's just the violation, I guess, of the outer boundaries of your frame, where it's like, okay, fundamentally who I am and what I'm willing to put up with, you're crossing that line and you don't want to deal with that. But I think, like, if you want to, for lack of better terminology, catering to frame, I agree 100%. You cannot negotiate this. You cannot force the issue. She has to voluntarily want to do that. And thus, in return, you reciprocate. And that's kind of how you invest in one another. And that's the hallmark of a healthy relationship. But, I think a lot of men, when they word it a certain way, they're like, oh, follow my lead and stuff like that. And we know what we mean when we say it. But again, because you say it like that, again, especially in a modern feminist world, they're not going to be receptive to that. But what we're really saying is like, oh, if you genuinely respect a man, like, you're going to trust him to take the wheel when his strengths come into play, and vice versa, things like this. Granted, there are some guys that got burnt one too many times. They're stuck in rage, and they really are just on your standard power trip because they want to control every variable to ensure they never feel that way again. But again, there's no guarantees in life. But I think a more realistic take on frame is just, don't violate my boundaries. Yeah.
Well, the issue that I have with that, Pete, and that interpretation is you're not going to start a relationship with someone that's disrespectful. Like, I know the guy that women complain about.
Yeah, you learn in real time. After the honeymoon phase, that's when you learn. Yeah.
I haven't met a woman or a dude that said, well, you know why I got together with this woman? Because when I saw her the first time, she came over, she slapped me, and she spit on my face.
Yeah, but
you're going to have a level of, this guy acted nice to me, or nice enough to where I saw a bit of potential for something to happen there, and taking out the attractiveness part.
Right, but I'm still saying the rule still applies the same way. You respect until someone disrespects your boundaries, then you're fine. But I think a lot of guys, again, they don't think that they can do better or get another alternative, so they'll put up with the disrespect. All I'm saying is that once the disrespect and all that stuff starts to come up, the boundaries being violated, the man has to have the self-awareness and respect to tap out and bow out of that relationship. But unfortunately, we see a lot of guys that just aren't willing to let it go. And thus things just get worse than they have to be. Yeah.
Well, getting back to the two questions as well, I just want to touch, like, my top two I came to realize was, first, kindness, like a kind person, and then secondly, related to what Pete said about sharing similar values. So kindness was always number one for me, because before that, it was like, oh, well, she's a bit angry, she got a bit annoyed, we don't, it's kind of excusing all these character traits as, oh, I don't know her yet. Maybe I'm misinterpreting things. So generally a kind, fair person that is usually a result of a better upbringing. And then secondary is the values and the way you see the world and respond.
Yeah.
But what were you guys just talking about? Sorry, I had to duck out for like 2 seconds. What were you just talking about then, Pete?
We were talking about the interpretation of the the term frame, and how
Yes.
how like a lot of guys, they know kind of what they're saying when they say it, but again, when they put it in the words that they put it in, women interpret it as kind of like oppressive, because like when you say, hey, follow a man's lead, in a woman's head, she kind of has this idea, oh, you're asking me to follow the lead of some man I'm not attracted to, snap of the fingers, 1950 style, screw that, I ain't doing that. It's like, no, we're not saying that. Voluntarily, you should choose the guy you want to be with. Duh. That's the perks of it.
Yeah, it's stupid. It's kind of like trust me before you know me, which is dumb.
Right. But I think a more realistic interpretation in practice, when you actually go out and experience things, is like just have self-respect and don't let your boundaries get violated. That's really kind of a more fair interpretation of the term. But I think it gets lost in translation due to a myriad of variables that we've discussed.
And also, guys don't want to talk about these realistic situations. Say they pop up. Say you're on a date or you come across a woman, which will probably be common with a lot of either direct or subtext of feminism and girl power. And I don't need a man. I don't want to cook. Why should I cook for you? Why should I do anything? Guys don't really need to stand up and have an answer for that. An eloquent answer to kind of show the girl, well, I won't do this for you then. Oh, don't you think that's unfair because of yada, yada, yada? Guys aren't either interested enough or don't want to verbalize how they would actually talk about it to a girl, let alone when we talk about relationships online with other guys and saying what we want, what we value, what we practice. And so a lot of guys will kind of, their hard drive will get rebooted when a woman puts them on the spot. And they'll say, well, I'm not going to do that for you. Why should I do that for you? Why should I respect you?
Right.
And for me, in terms of like, it comes down to that central point of a woman wants to feel safe. And so why? She wants a guy to lead. And I've always said to women that push back on this, it's like, you'll never feel safe if you always stand in front of me. You want to feel safe? Stand behind me. Let me lead. Let me be figuratively taller. Let me be stronger. Stop trying to be strong, tall, and stand in front of me. You want to do that, you're going to get hit. You're going to feel insecure. I'll never be there. And of course, it's not so much you don't respect me. You just feel so afraid around me. So stop standing in front of me.
Yeah, there's a dual layer to that, though. A lot of these girls, unfortunately, now that they're looking for a relationship, a lot of them did go through those bad boys who really made them feel unsafe. So now they're guarded, right? So that's one layer of it. But me personally, I would turn it around. It's like, well, why wouldn't you want to do these things for someone that you trust, someone that you respect, someone that you desire and admire? Why wouldn't you want to do these things for someone? To the same degree, why wouldn't a man want to protect and try to offer a better life to someone that he deeply cares about? Like, why wouldn't you want to do that? Isn't that why we're sitting at this table, to test to see if the potential for this exists in the first place? Why does it have to be a pissing contest between us? It's not intersexual competition. It's supposed to be effort.
But to play devil's advocate, though, again, I agree with you, is both men and women, but especially women who are the more vulnerable and shy and insecure in this dance.
Yeah.
Like she can say, well, I don't trust you yet. And then what does a guy do? Act like a hero and just keep trying and proving that he's not like the rest of her history, that he's not going to hurt her. And then she's just got the luxury of not trying at all and not being, opening up a little bit and trusting, like if he's actually shown you and he has, but it's comfortable for you to kind of keep your walls up. Again, it can backfire, and it has on many men that a guy can pay attention to what a woman's fears are and why she's not opening up or why she's not allowing you to take her to bed soon enough or kiss her or whatever it might be. And you're a patient man, but that just becomes a habit. Whereas on the first date, she might have jumped into bed with the bad boy.
True. And again, this is why some men, like myself, have a certain attitude towards the whole sociosexuality thing. Like me, I take sex very seriously. So a woman who just has that kind of baggage, like someone like me, I probably wouldn't even know what to do with that. Like there's probably nothing I could do to help that person. So it's like, again, it makes more sense for me to.
You probably wouldn't be able to hold much of a conversation with that person as well.
She is telling me about how she's traveled all over Europe. She's lived all these experiences. What do you do? Oh, I'm an accountant. Like, how can I relate to this person? I can't. I can't.
Mm.
Yeah. So again, that's important too. But yeah, I mean, I don't think a lot of guys pose the question the way I just posed it. Like, yeah, you're looking at it like I'm asking you to submit to slavery. Like that's what you think I'm asking you when I talk about these things. It's like, why, like a man that you really love and care about, why wouldn't you want to cook him a nice meal to show your appreciation? Just like a man, if he really loves a woman, he'll jump in front of her and take a bullet. He'll do it. Why would he not
That's
do
why
that?
so many of these
Why would he not do that? But again, I think everyone's just so atomized in their own little worlds now that again, the types of situations like my grandparents in the World War II era, it's like, what are you talking about? That's a pipe dream. Past the crack pipe, you're talking out of your ass. That doesn't exist anymore. And nobody even entertains the idea of what something like that would even be like because they just think like, oh, it doesn't exist. Tinder, this is the new standard. And it's like, ugh, you know?
Yeah, I
Well,
think some people have called me naive where I keep saying, not in a woo-woo mystical sense, but a lot of guys to me seems like, well, this is just the reality of a feminist world that I've been dropped in, and I just need to agree and comply to experience the least amount of pain, and that's how I'm going to make my way through life. Whereas I feel like I kind of generate more of my life. Yes, I'm aware of the ontological world out there, but I have a great degree of, what I say yes and no to, and how much time I waste with a certain person, and what words I verbalize to let a person know what I feel.
Exactly.
Whereas a lot of guys like, no, there's no way to win the game. You might as well just accept it, and the best you can do is just not play.
Yeah.
But you might be leaving
I will
chips
give
on the
you.
table.
I will give you an example, Pete, where you said you can't relate to that person. I will give you an example where that type of situation works because it's really close to me. And one of my close acquaintances is dating this one girl. He's an older guy, and she's kind of the same age that he is. She was raised up in an environment where she had an exceptionally good financial situation. So she went through the whole rigmarole of food, travel, and culture. She's been all over the place. She's talking about all of the experience that she's had in life. She's used to going to theaters, opera, so on and so forth. Now, this other guy, he had a very, I wouldn't say sheltered life, but he never had the financial ability to even go on a vacation outside of the country, and even within the country, he struggled to do that. And he was more of a homebody type of individual.
Right.
But he spent his time reading and learning and so on and so forth. Now, when they got together, she has the respect and is fascinated by all the things that he knows. So now when she takes him out to the theater, because she makes him go outside of the house, he tells her about the history of the theater, what the author meant when he wrote the play. And now she has a very different interpretation than what she used to have, where she just went in and I just like the funny music and I like how it sounds. And if there's that layer of respect there for what the other person did, it's definitely a way in which you can relate because she's fascinated about the things you can add to the experience that she's already been through.
Yeah,
so she
I
can
agree.
talk about South Korea and what she did there, but he's going to tell her about the history of South Korea and how it ended to the point where it's at now.
Yeah, I agree with all that. Just to kind of clarify my intent when I said that, I was talking more in the sense of like sociosexuality, because like the stereotype, and stereotypes tend to exist because they're true. People, when they travel abroad, especially like when they're on their own or with their own circle of friends of the same sex, again, they go on escapades and things like that. So what I meant is like due to my sociosexual incompatibility with the person.
Okay.
That's kind
I
of where the disconnect is. Here's a girl who's lived a very fast life strategy, casual life. Here's me who deeply values sex. I don't look at it as something that you just give to anybody. It's very valuable. I can't connect with this person. We view it differently. So there's going to be complications in the bedroom and probably outside the bedroom. It's going to spill over. That's the kind of thing I was talking about. But what you're saying, oh yeah, fantastic. I can even tell you, perfect example. I'm an accountant. I never left the country, but let's say I date a girl. She's traveled a few places. She's like, yo, let's get on an airplane. Let's go to Iceland. You ever been there? Let's go check it out. Yeah, of course. New novel experience. Fantastic. And I'm the guy, exactly like you said, I'm the nerd who will look up everything there is to know about Iceland before I even get on the plane so that I feel comfortable in the situation I'm about to immerse myself in. Yeah, that type of situation, I'm with you 100%. But there's some situations where the differences are just too vast that it's like, I can't connect with this girl sitting across the table from me. We've lived way too different lives and our values are so different. Our interpretations of things are so different. It's impossible to reconcile, or near impossible, I should say.
Oh, yeah, I agree with that. Thank you for the clarification.
Yeah. It's tough, man. It's not easy.
Well, again, the more you make this personal and really start to write your own ethics about, this is non-negotiable. You don't just follow, the church of manhood online, what a man needs to be, and the 10 commandments. You kind of say, well, okay, cooking, is it really that important to me? Does she need to be a chef?
Yep.
Or do I really just appreciate a sandwich here and there? She doesn't need to be great at it.
Yes.
Do I really need it to be this great at this? Like, really look at what are your non-negotiables, not what the manosphere says, not the cartoonish examples, but what really is meaningful for you. What's the foundation of a relationship for you?
Yeah, a general rule of thumb I have is like, if something doesn't feel right, it probably isn't. If something feels off, it's probably bad for me and I want to steer clear. So the way I look at it is like, if that feeling isn't really there when I'm with a girl, then I'm probably not too worried until that does become a concern. I think in practice, that's kind of what it's actually like. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very hard for, say both men and women, particularly for women, but both sexes, is like, given excitement and stability, most people grab for excitement, especially if there's very little risk. And in today's type of dating where, nothing's long-term, nothing's going to stick, I'm in and out, literally and figuratively speaking, everyone's just choosing the most exciting thing. Everyone's monkey branching to excitement rather than monkey branching to stability.
Of course, because the latter requires more resistance. People want instant gratification, path to least resistance, dopamine receptor getting its hit, all that fun stuff. And because everything is so easy to meet, it becomes very addictive, Even me, like I love video games. I grew up on video games, but I'm not going to deny the fact that video games create an illusory dopamine response. Like, hey, you actually succeeded at something when really all I did was beat a video game. Versus actually like getting my certified public accountant license, that's a real accomplishment. Like I can actually do something with that outside my front door. Beating that video game, not so much, unless I'm like a professional streamer or something like this, which I am not. So yeah, it's interesting how, we can kind of trick our brains with these instant gratification hits, making us think we're actually being successful at reproduction and survival and whatnot, when really, no, we're not. Again, this is the MS-DOS, not understanding the Windows 11 we inhabit today. Yeah.
Yeah, look, fortunately or unfortunately, like a big part of men's lives since we deal with the outside world a lot is having to be responsible and knowing what the right path is. Women are hampered by not really having to deal with that an awful lot. Yeah. And today, because they've basically, crossed their own bridge and they've made their world the way they want, they're having to deal with something they're not really built for, and they're coming up with a whole manner of excuses, while men are still trying to craft up excuses to be with these new women. And no one's actually kind of saying, hey, let's calm down from this dopamine high and these unrealistic expectations and just kind of, come back to what is important, what's good for a stable and good relationship. Like if you're a woman, don't just virtue signal what is good. Really believe it, and more importantly, choose it. And the same with guys. You can't complain about, how women don't treat you well and don't respect you and all this, and you're just dating strippers or bimbos on Tinder or just chasing after those. So the realistic attitude, however unsexy it might be, I think is where people need to calm down and sort of really calibrate their life according to that.
Absolutely.
Well, and the first question that needs to come to mind the second you say something like, I want to be treated well, is, am I the type of person that deserves to be treated well?
Right. I agree. Like if you're a piece of shit, it's like that's what you put out into the world.
Well, I think it's been actually asked of many of these bimbos, like on, Fresh and Fit and all these other ones. They all value high value men. They want X, Y, and Z, something that it only exists in the 0.5% of the population. Then the moment you say, okay, what are you going to contribute to all of this high value stuff? What makes you a desirable woman apart from your body? And most of them can't say anything.
Yeah. Well, it's Miami. So what are you going to expect from Miami? Again, wasn't it you, Khaoru, who said that the type of fishing lure you put out,
exactly. Yep.
That's the type of fish you're going to get.
Well, at the same time, I mean, if you're watching Fresh and Fit, you get what you fucking deserve. I'm sorry. Like You're looking at guys that say they're high value, and at the same time they're on sugar baby website. Okay, dude, I believe you're very high value.
Well, yeah, also you're fishing in the pond of entertainment. If all your entertainment is that, well, that's kind of what your life's going to look like anyway, and that's the frustrations you're going to get. I think I said it in a recent stream, but I was thinking about making a video about it. Like everyone, all the guys sort of say all women are the same. We might be describing general female nature, but then they start conflating it to the extreme of like every single woman's like that. And no matter what you do and what judgment you assert, like it's not going to change the outcome, that she's going to leave you and your life's going to be shit. And I kind of use the analogy, well, you can either all say all women are the same fish and all of you are fishing in the sea, or you can say, I'm going to fish in a river or a pond or something that's not as vast and expansive and sort of not, in the middle of the bell curve. But I'm actually going to make a concerted effort not to go for easy fishing in the ocean, but try and find, the kind of rivers or lakes that are more amenable to the kind of fish I want to catch and eat.
To go a bit beyond that, look at also the examples that are being provided. Because Pete used the example of Fresh and Fit, and look at the girls that are brought there on a regular basis. Don't you look at them and say, well, all these girls are kind of the same? They're all kind of club girls or strippers or whatever. Like those aren't the people that are on my on my want to have list. I've never seen a girl there that's I don't know, like a geek or a college graduate or an average looking fucking girl. No, they're all models and they all come there to shill their OnlyFans account. Like I'm sorry, but that's not the type of girl that I'm looking for. Like if that's the only thing you can get in Miami, then I'm sorry for you and you're gonna have to go through that. But I doubt that every single member of that entire city has Botox in their lips and has been under a knife at least 4 times to get breast enhancement.
Well, that's why the channel's that popular. You want to give men a certainty mindset of the way women and relationships are. And so what do? You handpick the actual examples that will make your theory or your outlook exactly certain. Because I think in the first couple of years, once or twice, I remember them having, a girl here and there that actually did stand up for herself and she was well-spoken and intelligent, but they've kind of eliminated that from what I hear of people that watch that. So they just get the dumbest people to prove their point. They don't get someone that has a little bit of intelligence. And guys will say, well, LOL human, all women are exactly like that. It's like, really? I've never in my life gone on a date with a woman, or maybe once or twice when I was in my early 20s, that's as dumb and myopic as a lot of those women are and entitled. So they handpicked women that will raise their argument.
Yeah, they're doing the Molyneux thing. The second he got a bit of pushback, okay, I'm only going to invite very dumb people on my show. I'm going to make sure I screen everyone because I'm the one that needs to look good over here, not the person that I'm interviewing. And I understand, like for them, like this is the other thing that really rubs me the wrong way, because like if you're going to be honest about the type of show you want to have, can you please stop pretending that you're trying to help anyone and you just want to make money? Because that's what you fundamentally want to do with your channel. Like if you genuinely want to have an honest discussion about the thing, you're not going to bring bimbos on your show every day.
Yeah. Well, again, it's people's choice what entertainment they want to consume, what easy entertainment they want to consume that makes them feel better about themselves, compared to consuming videos that will help them get out of where they are and try and move them away from the hamster wheel of feeling negative or stuck, So yeah, like how can you make someone be more realistic? Like at the end of it, like I'm happy to help people if they get something from my discussions, conversations, whatever. But ultimately, I care about myself and people who want to take responsibility. But I'm not going to sit here also. I'm more of the tact of Coltane. I care about myself first, and I'm happy to stand shoulder to shoulder with guys that also want to adopt that mindset of like, yeah, I want to be realistic. I want to try and work my problems out. I want to discuss it with men who are being realistic, and women for that fact, if they want, for that matter, if they want to. But I'm just not going to sit here being sort of virtuous and I care about men, like you mentioned, the other channels that, they won't answer a question unless you kind of throw it in Patreon or it's a private video or you pay me $100 and then I'll only answer your question kind of thing.
Well, and at the same time, you get your entertainment wherever you want. I have no issue with that, but I'm not surprised if your entertainment has a genuine issue with being able to concatenate words and they need to take a small break after every little syllable that they utter and then act like, I don't know why I have issues with women. Well, then maybe your entertainment is a good reflection of the type of person that you are. And you have way deeper issues than the things that these guys are talking about.
Yeah, and I think this is just this is another extension of the whole red pill rage, red pill depression. Like, again, if you get stuck in that and then give that state of being a platform, naturally it's just going to reflect out. Yeah.
Well, it goes back to another thing that's popular within these circles, where when they talk about the collapse and the end of civilization and whatever the hell. It's always baffling to me that the guy that can fix an engine always thinks that his skills are the ones that are going to be the most important, and everyone else is going to be fucked up. And you need to know how to fix an engine because that's what's going to keep you alive, and everybody's going to want you around. But the question of where the hell are we going to get the fuel never pops up, or anything along those lines.
Yeah, it's actually more of those MS-DOS tools that you're going to have to know. How to build shelter,
I mean, farming,
all that.
Is farming important? No, like food isn't important. The engine, that's what's important. And surprisingly enough, like, you imagine my shock that the accountant is going to be the one that says, no, we need to know exactly where all our stocks are and what we're doing. And the IT guy says, no, the economy is going to collapse, but my Bitcoin is going to be the one that survives, and my skills are going to, come on, man.
Society collapse, but hey, don't forget to file your tax return.
Exactly.
Yeah, what are you going to take from me?
I want to drop one more unrealistic male attitude in the discussion before we wrap here. There's a instantly recognizable meme in the men's community about cat ladies. And there's a widespread belief that eventually women will just age out and end up with a house full of cats. I stumble across I can't remember whether it was a survey, something published by an insurance company or a financial company, but they had some numbers in this article, and I can't remember exactly the numbers they used, but it was roughly in this area. Something like 60% of the women who are single who reach a certain age basically take themselves off the dating market.
Yep.
They age out and they're not interested in a relationship with a man. It's almost exactly the opposite for the typical man in that same age group. Something like 60% of the men are still interested in a relationship in that age demographic. And I think one of the silly things that develop in a lot of guys' minds is the idea that eventually women will get old enough where they get desperate. But the reality is that they just basically remove themselves from the relationship market.
Yeah, I think it's
important to think
I think
about.
it's twofold. Yeah, I think it's twofold. One, well, there's probably the group of women that, again, they clearly realize they don't have what men want. So what's the point? They kind of look at it the same way some of these men say, "Hey, best thing to do is just not play." There's some like that, but then there's other ones that are like, "Well, wait, I made my own money. I have my own status. I got my own life. So why do I need one?" And that's for a lot of them as well.
Right.
So, yeah. So the logic becomes, hey, here's the truth. Here's how women really feel. Back in the old days, more men and women paired off. Now a lot fewer are. So maybe not as many men are attractive to the average woman as we thought.
Right.
which I
Well,
think
There's
the
a
average
third factor as well.
is
There's a third
scary.
factor as well, that a lot of these women, when they get past mid-40s, menopause actually just makes their desire just drop off a cliff.
Yeah.
True. Yeah,
And
that
it-
happens, I think, in both sexes, but at different paces. Yeah.
Well, and it goes into the other direction from the guys as well. Like, how many guys are you going to find that are genuinely interested in you being a 40-year-old? Because as much as the meme is there, like, oh, you're going to be old and you're going to have the ability to get younger girls. Well, probably the guys that would be interested in these women also have the potential to be able to get a younger girl. Because even if you're a woman in your 40s, you're not going to look for the fat guy that's at home playing video games. You still want somebody that has a certain level of respectability. And those guys probably, as they say, they still can pick their own kind of woman. And instead of picking one that's 40, well, maybe I can get one that's 36. And the difference between 40 and 36 in a lot of cases is pretty big.
Yeah. Yeah. But again, the socially engineered world of feminism, I think, has empowered women to kind of look at the situation and be like, you know what? I don't have to get with some guy that I don't
Yeah.
genuinely find attractive just to have my
Exactly.
Yep.
I don't have to do that anymore, so I'm not gonna.
Yep.
The silver lining here, though, is that if a girl like that does pick you, chances are it's because she genuinely likes you, which is
That's why.
The other thing is that you could get the ones that just want to be looked after. Like, they're not really interested in a relationship; they just want to be looked after.
that's like a utility angle. Yeah.
Yeah.
And what Pete has just said is something that I mentioned multiple times. That's the truth of Occam's razor. It's not hypergamy. It's not the way you want to see things. Most of the times, it's probably she just didn't like you, or you didn't fit with her, or you had something that she didn't like. Maybe something you can't help, so she didn't mention it. But most of the time, that's the real reason why she said no, or she broke up with you.
True,
Not because.
Yeah, but the other side of hypergamy, though, is that because she herself is becoming more valuable in her own eyes by the own metrics that she measures, again, the pool of men that she actually deems quote unquote worthy shrinks as well. I like to call the concept pricing yourself out of the market. You're basically pricing yourself out. Because here's the thing, if you're a woman and you make $300,000 a year, right? How many men are going to be able to, again, provide and take care of you for anything? If anything, you're taking care of everything. Who wants to be a sugar mama? I don't see that many happy sugar mamas walking around. Yeah. So
And also, like, we can sit here and intellectualize our answers post facto, but at the end of it, like, we just feel what we want to do, and in that split second afterwards, our brains justify what we want to do anyway. So these women are just kind of going on the impulses, and a lot of us clever, unquote unquote guys, we just tend to do what we want, and there's all manner of justifications we can sort of very eloquently put forward as to why we're doing it and why we're right and women are wrong.
Yep.
You took the words out of my mouth, because then, as Pete said, it's a very good example, but then you need to ask the question, well, does the woman want to date? Because if she doesn't, like, it's irrelevant if she makes $300K a month. She can make 10K a month or 1K a month, but she just doesn't want to date, so it's irrelevant. It's easy to look at the socioeconomic situation and, okay, this might be a particular case, and this is the reason why she doesn't want something. Ultimately, It's up to the person.
yeah, sometimes it could be just psychological reasons. But what I'm saying is that if a woman does make 300K, I'm saying that
there's a smaller incentive for her. Yeah.
Right. What I'm saying is that does have an impact on her desirability, because, again, if her pool of options are either a small pool of guys that only want to use her for casual fun, or a bunch of guys that she does not find attractive and has zero interest of utilizing as just some guy who changes light bulbs and fixes toilets, yeah, she's looking at it like, nah, I'm good. I'm going to be on my own. I'm cool with that. And this is what we're seeing. Yeah.
Yep.
When he said guys that fix toilets and switch light bulbs, made me think of MGTOW content creators. It may be just my personal bias there.
I mean, yeah, he's just the guy around the house to just do the things she doesn't want to do. I mean, yes, there are relationships like that. Highly transactional. Don't recommend it, but they do exist. Yes.
No. I was referring to the mediocrity of the guys, but yeah, I get your point.
But Pete, the example you just gave is the new reality. I mean, never before in history have so many women got to the point where they can be independent. And I don't think a lot of men have adjusted to that idea.
Correct.
Th-
But
This
yeah, it's
th-
the
th-
Windows
this is
11 though, that gives them that.
this is the new reality. I mean, whether you like it or not, the idea that there is a big pool of women out there who are waiting to be dependent on you is wrong. And I think that's where men have fallen behind. They're not keeping up with this new reality.
Yeah.
But
No, I agree.
Boffin, sorry, go ahead, Pete.
No, I was just saying I agree 100%. And then sometimes, like you guys were pointing out with the Fresh and Fit podcast, they take the Miami chicks who do want that, and then it's like this is representative of what it is. It's like no,
Right.
it's really not. We live
Right.
in a very different world now. But I think honestly, in reality, if women's financial circumstances were different, I think that they probably would. Their pool of options would widen. But again, as a woman, if you have all this money, you have all the power that comes with that money. Why would you want to give that up just to have a crack at a relationship? It just doesn't make sense, you know?
Right.
It's almost like in today's, like, again, accept the reality of what the world is like today, and realize you're in it. Like if you live in a big city or big Western city, don't just kind of will yourself that that it's not that way. There's a degree to which you can make choices that can mitigate that. You don't want to be a nihilist, as you said, Pete, like that nihilistic valley. But also the best you can do almost is just to be attracted to what you're attracted to. And then when you're in front of that person, do not ignore red flags and what you feel. And if you feel those things, verbalize everything. And through that verbalization and asking questions and clarifying what she said, what she meant by something that gave you those red flags, you're going to kind of mitigate and understand exactly if she is a yes or a no. So the best you can do is just go with your feelings. You're naturally attracted to people, your MS-DOS, and then what you need to insist upon and exercise that muscle is to verbalize and clarify every red flag that pops up into your head, just so you're not imagining your way out of a potentially good mate.
Yeah, and then you could also assess her receptiveness to your problem with that, because obviously if she's considerate, she's going to be keen to listen. Yeah.
And then another question comes forth with what was just discussed moments ago. If older women are comfortable with their financial situation, and there's definitely an amount of the population which is, it begs the question, are the younger women that you're trying to date genuinely attracted to you, or are they just using you for their financial benefits? Because all of these guys that say that they're going to get old and then they're going to get their pick of the litter, well, you're not really getting the pick of the litter. You're just getting to pick something that you're going to pay for.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing. This is the other side of it. Again, when you're vetting, right? Is this woman sociosexually compatible with me? Does she share my values? Stuff like this. A man has no problem giving that lifestyle and providing for a woman, provided that she has what he's looking for. You know, it's just that, like, you know, you don't, whether you're a woman or a man, you just don't want to invest your time, energy, and whatnot into people that, like, just don't give a shit about you or value you as a person. Like, that's really what it is. So again, the rules of the game are still the same. Older women or younger women, you're just checking for those red flags and clarifying and so on. Like what else can you realistically do except your due diligence?
Yeah, it's almost like having relationships with very safe people who aren't going to emotionally hurt you, while totally disregarding that you're also not going to get a lot of the closeness that you're missing out on a lot of that, because you're going for a lot more safety on the balance of things. And then at what point do you require so much safety that just the chasing is not even worth it? Like, you're just getting a body. So, you know, these old guys that say, now I can have the pick of the litter of all these young girls. It's like, yeah, great for, like, you know, 20 minutes on Viagra, but what the fuck for? Like, where I can never figuratively embrace them and have a conversation and trust them. And it's like, no, they're just like a doll I pull out of the room, have fun with, or a doll I put in the passenger seat of my convertible Ferrari, a doll I pull out for certain situations. So she's literally an object. And if you're fine with that, if you're honest enough to admit that, then fine. But I don't think a lot of these smarter guys want to actually admit what they need. And if they admit what they need, they can't get from any women, fine. But a lot of them are trying to fool you and themselves about they can get everything in a bimbo that's so far removed from them, they might as well be speaking English and they're speaking Japanese. And they think they can get an intimate relationship out of that.
Yeah, I think deep down these guys do want intimate relationships, but again, they don't admit that, and that's why, again, even after having their tosses in the hay, they still feel empty. And I think, yeah, I mean, I've talked about this on my channel. I have talked about things like relationship skills and stuff like this. That's like what those men need to be taught. They don't need to be taught how to spin plates and stuff like this. Don't get me wrong, there's a market for that. But I think the men that we're talking about that lament the loss of the relics of the times of old, where relationships like my parents were highly functional and like that was like a beautiful thing. Like, I think those guys, it's a different prescription you got to give them. I always like to say that every man is a custom job. A custom job. You got to diagnose it, figure out what's going on, and that's how you figure it out. Yeah, but that's definitely
Women
something
too.
lacking.
Yeah,
I mean,
not
women
a light
too.
bulb that needs to be replaced.
Women too, but it's hard to get through to them. And I think the more I talk to them, the more I realize, like, yes, I can do my best to be tactful in like how I say things, but the ladies, they got to hear it from the ladies. I just think they don't take us seriously a lot of the time. They don't listen to us. I'm not saying that there aren't any who don't take us seriously at all. I just sometimes like in my experience talking to them, they kind of just look at me like nah, that's not right. It's like, okay, we'll see how you feel 5 years from now. We'll see. And maybe not. Maybe it just depends.
Look,
You know?
everyone's like, there's something to be said for optimism and, having drive that you can do better than most, that you're going to be the exception. I remember there was this comic strip by, I think, Dan Clowes, and he was talking about going to art school. And the first day of art school is like a class full of 20 or 30 students. And the teacher at the front of the class says, well, statistically speaking, and every year I observe the same students, he says, 1 out of all of you 30 is going to become a successful artist. And then you just see the thought balloons of every single person in that class say, that's going to be me. That's going to be me. So you got 30 people saying, I'm going to be the exception.
And let's not forget that a lot of the times the commonalities and the things that people genuinely want are the ones that get ignored. A lot of the times you listen to the discussions that are being had, and for some reason it's ignored that people want to be treated like people. They forget that women like to feel good as well. Guys like to feel good. They like to have fun. They want to feel like they're respected. But somehow all of that goes out the window because of ideology. Whether it's feminism, whether it's the more extreme circles of the male community, it always comes down to, I'm not going to treat the other person like they're a human being. I'm going to treat them like they're a puzzle to be solved. And for whatever reason, the places where I'm in have the answer to the puzzle because apparently it worked out so well for all of the rest of them.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a team sport. It's not meant to be a game of chess. At least ideally, it should not be a game of chess. But unfortunately, relationships sadly do get treated like a game of chess, and everyone's trying to like get to the checkmate first. Yeah.
Well, yeah. Again, for someone who's lost or has been hurt, the thing they're desperate for is an objective answer, so it doesn't really happen again. Because objectively, you feel like, oh, I screwed up. I was so sure. Like I went to the altar till death do us part, and I was blindsided. Like I had so much 100% secure optimism of this, and I got it completely wrong. So let me listen to these guys that seem like they know what they're talking about. They're completely sure of themselves, and it's not just one guy; it's like 100 of them. They're sort of saying the same thing, and we get along. It's very hard to kind of, on the back of your history, take them with a grain of salt. And I suppose it depends on your temperament, but I realize what guys are up against, especially if they've had really, really bad experiences. But after a while, like taking baby steps, that's why I always say to these guys to practice what you're listening to and what you think are axioms in male spaces. Just try them out. See if they actually work. Don't just stay in theory all the time. Take them out into the world and see if they actually hold water. And then you'll see you're butting your head up against like rhetoric, and it's not reality.
Yep.
Oh, and stop assuming that people act face to face like they do when they're online. That's the other thing. Like,
And it's also
most of the
discounting.
people. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, and it's also a discounting empathy. If you're just going to be in your frame, how a guy needs to be, how a woman needs to be, you're just turning yourself into a sociopath. Like, I don't care about the other person as a human being. When you just mentioned that, we need to realize that another person wants to feel good and they're a human being. If we kind of go in there as like a monolithic male, a cookie cutter, high value male looking for a cookie cutter, high value female, you've got no empathy. You don't care about sort of her frailties, understanding her, really like listening and paying attention to who this person is, from ethics to actions to upbringing to everything, and then seeing if you can actually sympathize or empathize and realizing whether or not, you know what, I feel sorry for you, but that's not really for me. Because the more you distance yourself sociopathically by trying to date, the more you're just going to run up against being desperate for intimacy, but operating as a sociopath and then saying, oh, what's wrong with women? It's like, well, you're not helping yourself. You're acting like a sociopath.
And there's also the misinterpretation of every action that I'm going to do is going to have the worst results. And think about it from a woman's perspective. If you're going out and you want to ask somebody what the time is or where the next cafe is, like the woman that you approach, she's not going to know if this guy wants to get me in bed, he wants to do whatever to me, or he just wants to know where the next Starbucks is. Like, try to think about it from the other perspective as well. Like, am I having to deal with a weirdo now? And most of the times, you're not going to get horrible responses in public. Like, if you go walk up to someone and say hello, they're not going to start yelling and then they're going to run away. At least I would assume the situation isn't that bad in the West. So, like, stop taking all of the all the worst possible examples that you've heard of online or from all of these circles and assume that that's the same thing that's going to happen in your case or wherever the corner of the world is that you live in going to happen as well.
Exactly.
Yeah, but even also in all those contexts, especially if you operate in this space, there are concepts, like one of the concepts we talk about is choosing signals. Like, you kind of know if she's giving indicators, like, you catch her looking at you a couple of times, things like that. Like those kind of things will tell you kind of what you need to know. But also just like, just common sense from where I'm sitting, kind of given what we know about women and how, risk averse, safety first, all that. Approach her from the front. Don't approach her from behind and tap her on the shoulder. Don't approach her from the side, things like that. It sounds like it's common sense stuff, but it's not as common as you think. There's a lot of people who just, they don't know.
Well,
so it's like,
Well, at the same time, don't have blood on your face and don't smell like you haven't taken a shower in the last 40 years. I mean, I'm assuming, I'm assuming a very basic level of understanding, because you can give any situation the worst interpretation possible. Like, you can walk up to someone and they may legitimately have mental issues. And I don't know, your shirt reminds them of her abusive ex, so they're going to start yelling out of the blue. But the chances of that happening, they're really small, if we're completely honest. And if you're nice, and as you said, you approach them from the front, you don't act like you have it out for them, or you want to do something nasty to them. They're mostly going to be nice, and a lot of the times they're going to say, I'm not interested. That's going to be the end of that.
I would also add that you figuratively approach them from the front, not game playing from the side and using pickup lines from the back and things like that, but just like presenting yourself as like the honest person that you are in front of your family and friends as much as possible. I know they're a stranger, you don't share intimate details, but whether it's physically or figuratively speaking, I think we should always be approaching them from the front for those guys who want to have relationships.
Yeah, and
Human's not a real MGTOW.
Yeah,
no, I'm not.
And also like memorizing scripts and things like that. Again, you're already putting yourself at a disadvantageous position by doing that, because what you're effectively doing by memorizing a script is, again, you're not putting the real you. You're not putting the real you out there. So again, you're not even giving her the opportunity to choose someone that actually exists. You know what I mean?
Well, wait a second, Pete. So you mean I'm not supposed to lie to her and tell her exactly what she wants to hear? What are you talking about?
Right. I mean, yeah. I mean, because here's the thing: if you sell a lie, the mask will fall off sooner or later. Yeah, but
I can't imagine that. That never happens, Pete. You're watching the wrong channels.
yeah. I mean,
Well, sort of, if you know enough of this information and you're self-aware enough, like you can go into a date and a woman will ask you one of those baiting questions, like, and then your natural response to any of those that put you on the spot is like, well, do you want me to tell you the truth, or do you want me to lie to you? And they automatically know, like, you want to be real about, like, don't ask me a question unless you want an honest answer.
yeah. There's a lot of tongue-in-cheek ways to deal with that. Like women, like they like to say things like, the classic one. I bet you say that to all the girls, and then you say some smart ass shit like only the pretty ones, and like crap like that. That's not an example of like being deceiving or things like that. That's just an example of social like adeptness and knowing how to navigate a conversation. That versus like memorizing just
thing,
what some
yeah.
guy told you to do. Like it's two totally different things. Yeah.
It's humor is different when you're using cliche humor as opposed to you're trying to be smooth and serious as a tactic or like a pickup meme. That to me is cringeworthy. But if you're just using like lighthearted, humoristic chit chat, that's different.
Women are good at picking up on bullshit. They have to be, because again, if they're not good at picking up on bullshit, they get themselves into dangerous situations inadvertently. I mean, and that does happen anyway when in the pursuit of bad boys and stuff like this, right? Which is a whole nother can of worms. But at the end of the day, that's the reason why that bullshit detector exists. Just to make sure, like, hey, I'm not getting with someone like who isn't what he says he is.
I'm glad you said that, Pete, because the other thing that I was going to bring up was don't be afraid to say I don't know or no or I don't know anything about that or let me think about that.
Yep.
That's one of the things that, at least in my experience, has always won me a shit ton of points. Because for some reason, guys have this veneer of I need to know everything that's going on. I need to be secure about everything, and I need to know everything about everything.
Well, think
And the
about it
first time-
logically. Well, think about it logically, right? If you could let go of your ego, that means like it's that much more difficult to hurt you. So if it's that much more difficult to hurt you, guess what you could do for that girl? You could protect her and keep her safe. That's how she's thinking.
And it also shows a level of respect, because you're not there to bullshit. You're telling her, well, you know what? I don't know about this. I need to think about it. It's not something that I ever thought about before. And it shows that you're actually listening to what she says instead of trying to look in your little manual for the correct answer to say to whatever came out of her mouth.
Yep.
Good point. Well, I'm going to stop the record button now. We can continue talking, guys. But thanks for your time. And yeah, I'll put this up as soon as I can.